Starting. Count it out. Yeah. Don't make me stop this car. Okay, so I'm looking in the back. Okay, great. We are ready to roll. I will go ahead. Thank you for offering us a little bit of extra time over the noon hour. We had a number of items on our to discuss over the lunch hour with our friends from Washington State as well. We will be now having a discussion about lessons learned from other states about tolling implementation. And so I'll be turning it over to Mr. Kassler and walking through this process. And so excited to have all of you with us today. Thank you so much. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay, I'm going to hope this is on. It sounds like it is. All right. Great to see you too. Chair Boehne, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Russ Kassler. I am the former tolling program manager for the Oregon Department of Transportation. I'm here today to share with you lessons that ODOT staff learned over a series of FHWA-funded peer exchanges last year. Following my presentation will be Ed Berry, Director of WashDOT's Toll Division, and Washington State Transportation Commission Executive Director Rima Griffith. In the interest of giving you as much time with them as possible, I'm going to be fairly short, but I'll start with a quick refresher, actually, on the tolling roles and responsibilities of the Oregon State Legislature, the Transportation Commission, and the department. You might experience some deja vu later when Rima presents on this topic, because I came across this format in a 2013 tolling report, and it was so useful to me, and I thought it might be useful to you, that I adopted it for our purposes. As you can see from this chart, much of the OTC's responsibility and role is centered around policy making. You may recall from the John Day meeting last August that the Commission's policy purview will include considering toll project objectives and setting toll rates that complement those objectives, looking at vehicle class pricing options and exemptions, mitigating adverse impacts on environmental justice communities by creating localized solutions like improving transportation options on and around tolled facilities, and establishing an enforcement framework that ensures that users pay their fair share without being overly punitive. As a disclaimer, this is not meant to be a totally exhaustive list, and naturally the legislature can change its role and responsibilities to include more policy setting if it so decides. But with that out of the way, here's what I want to share with you about the tolling peer exchanges. First, we'll go over the basic who, where, and why details. We'll spend some time talking about the scale of operations at these tolling authorities. Third, I'm going to share with you the key takeaways from these visits as they pertain to procurement, technology, and policy decisions. And I'll finish by providing a brief overview of what we shared with toll authorities from our own experience so far. So who did we visit? Where did we go? Our peer exchanges were broken up into 2 trips. In March of last year, we spent 2 days with WashDOT's Toll Division. And in late July, we went on a whirlwind tour in California. We visited 4 toll authorities in 4 days. So you'll see those here: Golden Gate Bridge, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in the Bay Area, the Transportation Corridor Agencies in Orange County, and LA Metro. These were, again, FHWA-funded trips, and we were joined by Nathaniel Price from FHWA, who served as our sponsor and participated in all our meetings. He was also, I will note, a very patient chauffeur. So why did we go? Why did we take so much time last year to take these visits and make these connections? We set out on these peer exchanges with 3 primary purposes. First, to get a sense of what was ahead of us by seeing the scale of mature tolling operations. Second, to learn from the experience of those who've been working in this world and implementing toll projects in order to apply best practices and avoid or mitigate common challenges where possible. Finally, we wanted to be able to inform our regional neighbors about the work in which ODOT, the OTC, and other key stakeholders have been engaged for the past year or so. So it may come as a surprise to folks outside of the tolling industry, but it takes a considerable investment of resources, money, people, and time to implement and operate modern tolling projects. Unsurprisingly, however, the amount of resources required depends on the type of tolling projects and the policy decisions involved. But here's a comparison by agency. This list compares the number and type of tolled facilities that each toll authority operates. It also shows the amount of annual revenue that authority collects and the amount of internal staff required to operate those tolled facilities. Note, this comparison does not include the number of external contract staff at a given toll authority, which, Ed, you might be able to speak to WashDOT's experience on the number of contracted staff on top of the internal staff required to operate. As I mentioned, the scale of operation varies greatly between the toll authorities we visited, and that's because each agency utilizes tolling in a different way to achieve different objectives. So we'll start where we started our trip in California, and that's with MTC. They actually have 2 toll agencies embedded with their agency. So BATA is the toll authority that focuses on pricing the 8 existing bridges in the Bay Area. And BAFA is responsible for 3 express lane facilities on the 80, 680, and 880 interstate highways. So you can see from this map of current and planned facilities that BAFA's tolling strategy is to manage congestion and improve capacity by adding express lanes or hot lanes to existing facilities. They have over 600 miles of express lanes in the construction, design, or plan phase of development. Down in Orange County, TCA has built entirely new tolled facilities to create regional bypasses next to highly congested, untolled corridors, in this case, I-5 and I-405. And you can see they've got, in addition to the 4 facilities they have currently operational, they have some planned facilities as well, some areas for possible expansion to extend that network further south. LA Metro's system, meanwhile, was designed to fully integrate with transit. So buses use hot lanes and their corresponding dedicated left lane on and off ramps to improve trip time and reliability. Fewer facilities, fewer lane miles that they're operating, but a different objective, and so far that's been pretty successful for them. I'll let Ed talk more about this in his presentation, but WashDOT has taken the all of the above approach, utilizing pricing to fund new facilities, increase capacity on existing facilities, and better manage congestion by selling access to HOV lanes for single occupant vehicles on SR 167. Note, this will be soon 5 facilities when they start tolling the SR 99 tunnel, and I'm sure Ed will be sharing more about that as well. So each toll authority had its own invaluable perspective and advice to offer. For the purpose of this presentation, however, we've distilled those lessons into 3 areas of key takeaways: procurement strategies, tolling technology, and policy decisions. So starting in procurement, WashDOT, MTC, the Golden Gate Bridge District, TCA, and LA Metro all have different vendor experiences, but they have a common understanding of what could be improved, what could be better, how that conventional setup can be made easier for toll authorities. And that's more flexibility, greater vendor accountability, more options for customers, and less system overhead. And Katie will talk a little bit more about those procurement strategies and how they affect those things that we've outlined here. WashDOT staff emphasized the value of splitting up contracts as one strategy to ensure the state is getting the best solution for each aspect of toll administration. So they recently procured a new back office and customer service vendor, a move that the toll division believes will be worthwhile for the state and customers. As for tolling technology, the industry is evolving rapidly. Here you can see Golden Gate Bridge still has its old toll plazas up at the moment, but they have recently converted to all electronic tolling. It's an engineering permitting challenge to get those historic toll plazas removed. But you can currently pass through, not at highway speeds, but at low speeds, and you don't have to hand over cash as part of a transaction. Another important lesson that we learned is that tolling technology plays a key role in regional traffic management and emergency response. That function can be incorporated into a state's Department of Transportation, as you see here in WashDOT's Traffic Management Center. It's very impressive, by the way. If you ever get a chance to go up there and visit, it is a war room like you have never seen before. Or it can stand alone as part of the toll authority's facilities, like the scaled down center you see here at MTC. So there are a couple of ways that toll authorities can approach traffic management, and it depends in part on how they're organized, if they're part of a Department of Transportation or not. Finally, policy is the last area of key takeaways, and it's the most important for you all in your role as commissioners. ODOT staff learned that policy choices made early in the process have lasting impacts on toll projects and toll authorities. I've listed just a few examples here, but Katie will talk more about the impacts of policy decisions on toll systems in her presentation, as will, I'm sure, Rima. One specific example that I wanted to highlight, however, is Washington's Civil Penalty Forgiveness Program. So the toll division found that they were spending a lot of money and staff time trying to impose and enforce civil penalties, but it wasn't actually helping their toll collection rates. Waiving civil penalties in certain circumstances for customers who open tolling accounts ensures better toll compliance and payment rates in the future while reducing agency expenditures. And finally, I don't want to spend too much time on this topic either, because Katie will do a deeper dive on this in about an hour, but I do want to briefly go over what we shared with toll authorities from our perspective. Since these were meant to be knowledge exchanges, it was important that we gave toll authorities an introduction to what we've been working on here in Oregon. First, we highlighted the growing congestion problem in the Portland metro area, a problem that forecasts show won't go away with capacity expansion alone. ODOT staff then shared their experience with the Policy Advisory Committee process and feasibility analysis, looking at the different variations on pricing that were considered and the final two projects recommended by the PAC and approved to move forward by this commission. Finally, we discussed the conceptual framework for a customer-focused mobility marketplace based on the lessons learned in the Origo program, hopefully the next evolution in tolling technology. To summarize, while we still have lots to learn about tolling, including the topics covered here, procurement, technology, and policy decisions, we greatly appreciated the opportunity to conduct these peer exchanges. Not only did they increase our understanding of tolling operations, they also established and helped grow critical connections with toll authorities in our neighbor states to ensure greater interoperability and continuity of tolling practices in the future. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions about these visits, I'm happy to answer those now. If you have specific questions, though, about Washington State's experience, you might want to save those until Ed and Rima's presentations.
Shall we keep going forward and then save the questions? Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Boehne and the rest of the commission. I am happy to be here today. My name is Ed Berry. I am the Toll Division Director for the Washington State Department of Transportation. And I think we've teed up a lot of good conversation for me today to talk about tolling in Washington. I'm going to talk about our facilities. I'm going to talk about our evolution as a division over the last 10 years or so. And I'm going to talk about some of the intricacies associated with not only our vendors, our procurements, but also some of our operational policies and some of the lessons learned that we found. So with that, I will jump right in for tolling responsibilities in Washington. Similar slide that we just saw. This is a very high level, just to give you an idea, a high level, the responsibilities. The legislature authorizes toll facilities and determines how the revenue is going to be spent. The DOT plans, builds, and operates these toll facilities. The Transportation Commission sets toll rates and exemptions, and the state treasurer's office arranges financing and issues the debt for some of these projects. So that's a very high level. Here's a very similar slide you saw of our toll network there. You see in the map on the right, our current toll facilities there are the SR-16 Tacoma Narrows Bridge there in the lower center, the 167 Hot Lanes Pilot Project, which runs from the south end of Lake Washington in the middle, the lower middle down to Kent, the 520 Floating Bridge right there in the middle in orange, and the 405 Express toll lanes, the north half that runs on I-405 between Bellevue and Linwood, that's that green stripe in the middle right, and then of course the SR-99 tunnel in downtown Seattle. So those are the current toll facilities. We plan to start tolling the tunnel in late summer. The first 4 are already in operation and have been for some time. I will get into the intricacies on how they work in a minute. And then we have the future toll facilities. So we have some projects that are coming in the not too distant future that are going to add to this tolling network. And those are the Puget Sound Gateway projects. And they are a combination of 2 roadways that provide basically access to the ports of Seattle and the ports of Tacoma. And those contain 2 roadways, SR-167 again, but further south, you see at the bottom orange there connecting 167 in Puyallup up to I-5 in Tacoma, and then 509 near SeaTac Airport that connects the existing southern terminus of 509 down to I-5 in the SeaTac area, and that's the orange stripe in the middle lower part. So these are 2 projects, sort of greenfield projects that are going to connect these roadways to I-5 and are a great addition to the network, but also providing access to and from the ports, and is a very important part of the ports of Seattle and Tacoma's viability. And they are designated as toll facilities by the legislature. However, we haven't got toll authorization for these projects yet, although the legislation that describes these projects do describe tolling as a part of the revenue stream to pay for those projects. And then lastly, the extension of the 405 Express toll lanes from its existing southern terminus in Bellevue down to Renton to where 167 begins. And what that will do when that project is done is create a 40-mile express toll lane system that goes from Puyallup at the southern end of 167 up to Linwood. So here are some of our toll facilities in more detail, and I'll get into some of these a little bit, but I wanted to talk about these in a bit of a chronological way and how they came about and how they've evolved. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge was our first toll facility, opening in 2007. These are flat toll rates that pay for the construction bonds used to build the project. So tolling is there to raise revenue to repay the bonds that built the project. Then the 167 projects came along not too much later in 2008. This was our first high occupancy toll lanes that were launched. This has a dynamic toll rate that managed traffic performance in the hot lane. And so the minimum toll rate on this facility is 50 cents and the maximum toll rate is $9. So it varies depending on the amount of traffic that's in that lane to manage throughput. And that has been in operation since, I say, May 2008. It is still a pilot project after all this time, and we hope that it gets permanent status this legislative session. So we're hopeful for that. But it is providing great benefit and has for the last 10 years. The next project that came along was the 520 Floating Bridge that we started pre-construction tolling in 2011 before the actual new bridge opened. This was part of an urban partnership project. This has variable toll rates depending on the time of day and the peak hour. The main focus of this is to repay construction bonds for the to build the bridge, but also to manage traffic as well. So it's got a multi-purpose function there. And then in September of 2015, the first phase of the 405 Express toll lanes opened between Bellevue and Linwood. And this, similar to 167, has dynamic toll rates to manage traffic performance out there to increase throughput and increase speeds for those who need a faster trip. We've also seen improvements in the general purpose lanes as well since this is opened. Again, those are managed dynamically. Those toll rates, the minimum toll rate for this facility is 75 cents, and the maximum toll rate is $10. And then lastly, the 99 tunnel just opened to traffic in February. Tolling could begin as soon as this summer. These are variable toll rates as well to repay the $200 million dedicated by the legislature in toll funds to pay for the project, but it also has a management of traffic aspect as well. So those are our 5 projects that are currently in operation, the evolution that has come along in the last 11 years or so, all with sort of different aspects and different functions, some with a revenue generation focus and others with a traffic management focus. And so next I wanted to talk a little bit about the evolution of the toll division itself and how it came to be. In 2007, our first project when the Tacoma Narrows Bridge opened, the toll operations group was formed out of this project office, this construction office, and this reported directly to our headquarters office in Olympia. So when that project opened, there was a call center, people on the phones with headsets. There was a call center located in Gig Harbor near this bridge, and we had a temporary walk-in center in Tacoma, so near the bridge. So it was being managed out of a very geographic small area because this was the only facility we had. Well, then around the same time as the SR-167 hot lanes were coming into being and being contemplated, there was more planning and process associated with, okay, how are we going to manage another toll facility that is in a separate geographic area? And that was a further evolution towards 2009 when the toll division was actively created in itself, its own distinct entity, especially as the 520 and 405 projects were starting to be in the planning stages. So the toll division was created in 2009 in contemplation of a third and fourth project coming online. And then when the 520 bridge finally opened for tolling, the statewide customer service center moved to the University District, which is near the 520 bridge. So that was the evolution from a very project-based, geographically focused area to handle tolling into a more of a statewide Puget Sound focus, where we had a division in and of itself, a call center that was handling calls and tolling for all of the facilities that were in operation. So getting a little bit further into what the toll division now does in its current incarnation, now that we have more facilities online, I'll go through this quickly. So this is how the administration of the toll business works in WashDOT. We have a business administration group that performs the traffic and revenue budget forecasting. This is a very, very important part of not only planning a toll project, but also in an operation and maintenance of a toll project. The traffic and revenue studies that go into the planning and design of a toll project are very important because it informs the decision-making on what is the function of the project, how it's going to perform, the revenue that can be generated, and what is the viability of certain toll rates. It also informs the commission on their toll rate setting policy, when they're initially setting toll rates, but also during the life of a project when it's in operation. We do updates for traffic and revenue to make sure we're meeting revenue targets, to make sure we're meeting our traffic management targets as well. This group also manages our budget and finance within the division, our planning and policy for the division, administrative support, QA/QC, and also public disclosure requests. We get a lot of public disclosure requests within the division. We have a dedicated staff person within this part of the group that handles nothing but those disclosure requests, make sure those are distributed timely around the division, and also we get back to the requester in a timely fashion. The next is the systems and engineering group, very, very important to the toll division. This is the technical part of the division. From an engineering side, we procure and develop and implement the back office systems within this division. We coordinate with project offices within this part of the toll division, and what I mean by that is we have very big mega project entities within WashDOT that do nothing but design and build big civil projects. And so what this group does is they coordinate the tolling discipline within these big projects that are delivered by others within the DOT. They manage that during design. They make sure that the contracts are informed. They manage where the tolling contracting might fit in and advise during construction. Once the projects are built, this group also monitors them and maintains our toll equipment out on the roadway. If there's a power outage, if we have snow, if we have an overheated server by the roadway, this is the group that manages that to make sure we minimize the impacts to our customers and to revenue generation. And then this is also a group that does a lot of data reporting. There's a lot of requests from the media, from the legislature, from others that have a lot of interest in our data from not only a traffic perspective, a revenue perspective, and a performance perspective. So there's a lot of, there's staff here dedicated completely to make sure we get accurate data and reporting. Customer Service Center and Operations, these are the call-in and walk-in centers, is managed by state staff. There's vendors that perform these functions, and I'll get into that about our relationships with our vendors and how those works. But we do have dedicated state staff associated with the call center and with customer service operations, printing and mailing, transponder fulfillment, our partnerships with retail, adjudication. This is all dedicated staff within our operations division. And then finally, communications and government relations, very, very important. There's a lot of interest in tolling and in the toll division from the legislature and from the media and from internal and external customers. So we have dedicated staff that are focused on those communications, media relations, education and public outreach, and marketing for these new projects that come online. It's very important that we talked about it a little bit earlier at lunch about how important it is that we make sure that our customers understand what the purpose of tolling, what the end result of tolling might be. And so having a dedicated staff associated with getting that word out there, managing those marketing campaigns is very, very important. And I'll also add on to this that we have the dedicated group of state staff that was mentioned earlier, but we also have what's called a general tolling consultant that is sitting with us as well. So we have a consultant that has staff members that are embedded with us, that work with us, and that allows us for them to bring that national perspective, that national expertise to us, but also it allows us to manage our workforce as well. If we have big capital projects that come and go, we have peaks and valleys of staffing that need to happen to staff those projects. And as those projects come through design, we can manage our staff level by using consultants and siphoning off consultant staff when we need to and bringing those up when we need to while keeping a steady state of washed out staff. So that brings us to our vendors. It was mentioned earlier that our vendors and how important they are to us, and it is true. We've got 3 vendors that are currently working with us right now, today as we speak. We are procuring a new system and operational contract, but I'll get into that in a second. But right now, we have 3 vendors that do 3 things for us. We have a vendor that handles our back office system and our customer service center, and that vendor is called Electronic Transaction Consultants Corporation, or ETCC. So they handle the back office system. They have the room full of people taking phone calls with headphones on. This is a single consultant that handles all that for us. And we have a vendor called Capsh that does our lane side equipment operation for us for 405, 520, and 167. So this is a consultant that maintains and manages our lane side system, our servers out on the lane side. They maintain our cameras and our infrared technology. So this is a lane side vendor that does that for us, that gets all the trip data and sends it back to ETCC in the back office. And then finally, our third vendor is our Tacoma Narrows Bridge vendor that handles our toll equipment and toll booth staffing out on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge itself. So 3 vendors that provide a lot of value to us and do a lot of the workhorse work for us, providing the nuts and bolts of trip generation, revenue counting, and sending it back to our back office, answering phone calls, sending out toll bills. All of this is performed by the vendor, so it's very important that you have a relationship with a vendor, because these really are, in a lot of ways, the faces of tolling. And if they have a bad day, or if there's an issue with a customer, the customer doesn't really see that as the vendor; they see it as the DOT. So it's very important that we keep a close relationship with them and keep a close management on them. I will also add that they have, amongst these 3 vendors, approximately 160 staff members that perform all this work. So that's quite a bit of staff out there. They're all located in the Puget Sound area, so they are all local people and local jobs. So that's something that's really important to emphasize. So here's some statistics on managing and monitoring our facilities and how we've grown in the last 11 years. So these are fiscal 2018 numbers that you see there for the 4 facilities. In fiscal 2018, there was a total of almost 53 million trips on these 4 facilities, generating over $208 million in revenue, in gross toll revenue. So if you break that down into smaller pieces, the 405 express toll lanes, 10 million trips, nearly $28 million of revenue, with an average peak period toll of $3.50. 167, 1.6 million trips, $3.5 million of revenue generated with an average peak toll of $3.70. 520, nearly 26 million trips, over $91 million in revenue with a peak toll rate there of $4.30. And finally, Tacoma Narrows, 15 million trips, $85.4 million in revenue with a flat toll rate of $5. So you can see the different scales of magnitude with each of the 4 facilities. 520 and Tacoma Narrows Bridge, you'll remember, is the primary focus there is to pay back construction bonds, and the 2 on the right are traffic management facilities in general. So reinvesting toll revenue. So I just mentioned that we do, the primary focus of the bridges is to repay construction bonds, but for 405, it's important to emphasize, I think, that beyond the maintenance and operation of the tolling equipment, which the 405 express toll lanes clearly do, they generate revenue well in excess of their maintenance and operation costs, which is great. There is also then revenue left over, a lot of revenue left over to be reinvested in the corridor, and I think that's important to emphasize. Our state law outlines how revenues may be spent for all of our toll facilities, and they must stay in the corridors in which they're collected. But after covering those debt obligations for 405, which has only been open 3 years, $11.5 million was reinvested into a project really quickly, and we like to emphasize that in that we were having some struggles in the northbound direction. We were able to harness that toll revenue very quickly, put together a PQ shoulder project, and really solve a congestion problem in really short order because we had that toll revenue at hand. And also, since then, we are reinvesting $15 million in toll revenue to fund some preliminary engineering on a subsequent project for some congestion relief in the north end as well. So it's important to emphasize that not only are we managing traffic with the express toll lanes on 405, but we are having revenue reinvested back in the corridor, and rather quickly. Here's some statistics on some of our administrative costs. We chose the 520 to talk about in particular, and these are fiscal 18 numbers. The average toll rate collected across all of our facilities was $3.65 or 66 cents per transaction. An example of some of these costs include our customer service center, our vendors, our toll equipment and toll equipment maintenance, oversight from state and consultant staff, rule enforcement from the State Patrol and administrative hearings, and other costs associated with transponders like mailing, pass costs, credit cards, fees. So there's costs associated to collect these revenues and to manage this traffic. So it's important to note that, and it's important to be transparent about that. We have an annual report that we publish every year where all of the statistics are there for anyone to go look to see what our costs are and what our revenues are for each facility. And this is an example that you can pull out of our annual report there for 520. $91.7 million generated in fiscal 2018. 77% of which went to pay back debt repayment, and 23% of which went to toll facility operations and maintenance. And it's also important to remember on our bridge projects that toll revenue not only pays back debt on bonds associated with construction of the project, but it also pays for maintenance and operation of the bridge itself, so facility operations of the bridge itself. So that's very important, especially associated with one of the biggest floating bridges in existence. It has definitely maintenance needs, and as time goes on, it'll have more and more, and on Tacoma Narrows Bridge as well. So it's an important source of revenue for maintenance of some of these big capital projects. Okay, so now to get into some lessons learned as we've evolved as a toll division over the last 11 years or so. We've broken it up into some internal and external lessons learned, I think, and strong coordination and communication is very, very important internally. What I mean by internally, I mean within the DOT itself, in that top box anyway. We've got regions and mega project programs that are all part of the system and part of developing projects that may or may not use tolling. We have a traffic operations center that was alluded to earlier, our war room there. They're very close integration with our traffic operations people within a region. Being very closely aligned with your finance and accounting, I think, is what I hear a lot about before my tenure here. Being on the same page with your financing and accounting group is absolutely essential, particularly when it comes to how you're going to deal with your customers. And I'll get into that in a minute. Communications, I already hit on. Legal and IT, there's a huge IT component associated with these projects and these processes. There's a lot of ownership that IT departments might have in a DOT, and so bringing tolling into that lexicon is really important in planning about how you're going to work together and how you're going to bring your vendors into that. Very important. There's audit functions associated with tolling that are very, very important for not only from certification perspectives, but from transparency perspectives. So making sure everybody's on the same page associated with what and frequency of audits that you're going to have. And then, of course, FHWA, I think with many of you are already familiar with the close coordination with them. But we've got a project on I-405 with expectations from FHWA on how it will perform. So very important to coordinate with them in the early development phase of a tolling project on an interstate. Staffing the toll division, hiring consultants with toll experience is very, very important. They can bring some national perspective to your processes and do your project development. They can also advise you on a lot of the lessons learned that they know from different states and different tolling entities. So that's something that's very, very important. That is a good lesson learned. And also for your state staff and owner staff to participate in the national tolling industry opportunities that are out there. There's IBTTA opportunity, there's TRB opportunity, and it has been a real important facet to developing our staff with the expertise over the last 11 years and allowing them to participate on some of those national stages. And then external coordination and outreach, very, very important. Legislative, locals, neighborhood, and business groups, they're all very, very interested in tolling. Utilizing and emphasizing your communications group and allowing and making sure you're being as transparent as possible, not only in the early stages of project development, but certainly in operations. And I'll get into that here in a couple slides about how we see public opinion sort of ebb and flow with the chronology of a project. One thing we mentioned earlier too, I think at lunchtime, is that tolling is a business. You have when you start tolling and when you have a driver that is now a customer, you very much have an expectation for customer service now. Similarly, how you might have an expectation of a utility or a cable company or anybody that you have a direct relationship with. So it's important to sort of change your mindset or keep your mindset on that we are providing a service, a business, and there's expectations, rightfully so, from a customer, not only from a customer service perspective, but a performance perspective, and being open and transparent about what some of those performances that are expected and to right wrongs or answer questions or fix problems is very important and goes a long way towards acceptability. some of the strategies and messages that we've used. I touched on this a little earlier with communications and how important that is, but what I try to describe in this slide is sort of the evolution of our messaging for projects as they came online. The top one, the marketing and education that we did for 520 was based on, okay, we're not doing toll booths anymore. We're switching to all electronic tolling. So we're going to go out and we're going to talk about how there's no toll booths, there's no stopping, there's no hassles. Go out and get a transponder. This is how it works. This is how easy it is. These are the benefits. So when the 520 process was getting going, those were some of the messages that we wanted to get out. And these are all based on focus groups that we did. I mean, it's not something that we at the DOT, or certainly I at the DOT wasn't used to, was actually going out, doing focus groups, trying to understand from a market perspective how we could best not only market tolling, but just to let people be aware and understand how tolling was going to work and when it was coming. And then, so the next project that came online was the 405 Express toll lanes. That had a different message based on some focus groups that we had. This was based on, this is a choice. This is a trip that you can take faster if you need to. This is how the express toll lanes work. It gets you home faster. It's a direct route. And so that was the marketing message that came out through that campaign. And that bathtub there represents that. Get home faster, sit in the bathtub rather than sitting here in traffic. And then finally, the latest campaign we had was trying to get better good-to-go pass penetration for some of the travel sheds for the 99 tunnel. The Alaska Way Viaduct, the way that was designed and the way that operated was very different than the tunnel. The Alaska Way Viaduct had exits on and off the viaduct itself right into the middle of downtown. The tunnel doesn't have that. It goes underneath downtown, and that was what we heard when we did focus groups, is that people didn't quite understand that they didn't really understand that the tunnel wasn't going to have exits in the middle of downtown. It's 200 feet down. So that was a revelation for our marketing consultants. So that's why we wound up with the Space Needle to the stadiums underneath downtown. Get a transponder. Your transponder will work on all of your toll roads, and you will pay the lowest toll rate. So what this slide tries to get across is that with each project, you'll have a little bit of different marketing strategy. You'll have a little bit different message you're trying to get out. But ultimately, you want to get people prepared. You want to get people to understand why you're doing it. And you want to talk about the benefits of tolling. You want to keep hitting on that. So this slide is 405 specific, but I think we touched on this a little bit at lunchtime too, is actually how we see support increase over time. And that's what this slide attempts to depict, where we ask this question: do you like having the option of using the 405 Express toll lanes for a faster trip? Early on during project development, when we asked these questions, when we asked this question to not just for good-to-go account holders, but also for drivers who just use 405 and didn't necessarily use the express toll lanes, you can see the acceptance and response to those questions start to dip at opening, and right after opening, you see the response to that at its lowest point. But over time, since its opening, and people really start to see the value, have used it a few times, then understand how it works, we really see the response of that starting to tick up. In this particular case in 2017, it was over 64% say they like having the option of using a faster trip. And so it's important to keep this in mind. This is similar to what other toll agencies have seen as projects have been out there and open a while, that you do start seeing acceptance start to happen. And this further is demonstrated by our 2018 survey of our customers this time. Do you like having the choice of using the 405 Express toll lanes? And this is 86%. So that was really good news for us, and 72% agree they like to save time when they use the express toll lanes. So this was very, very good news for us. We also saw this not only from surveys and sort of anecdotal evidence, but when we talked to a lot of the legislators who were around when the express toll lanes first opened, they, as years went by, at the 2-year mark, they were saying, you know, a lot of the complaints that we had soon after opening have really gone away. I haven't heard about 405 in a while. So that was good news for us, that we started to see that acceptance start to happen. And that's not only that's important from a marketing and education perspective, but also from a transparency perspective and doing your best to keep hitting on the fact that it's there when you need it, it's for a faster trip, and it does help manage not only traffic in the express toll lanes, but the general purpose lanes as well. Now, finally, I'm going to hit on some toll payment methods that we have within our program. We've got our Good to Go Pass, which is our transponder. You will pay the lowest rate when you have a Good to Go Pass. So again, we try and make our pass penetration numbers as best we can. It's the best for everybody to pay a low toll rate, but it also is, from an operational perspective, much easier to manage. The pay by mail there at the bottom is an extra $2 for those who do not have a transponder or perhaps aren't from the area. That extra $2 is to pay for all of the costs associated with managing that system, from postage to the Department of Licensing lookup, so we can find people's registration and then mail them a bill. But it also does generate a lot of phone calls and a lot of the problems that we've seen over the years since we started offering this method. So the more pass penetration we can get, the better off we'll be. Another option we have is called pay by plate. We were advised by some of our expert consultants to offer this. And what this is for people who do not want a transponder but want to have an account with us. We offer this option that you can give us your license plate, and then you can give us your credit card, and you can give us a balance to work from, but you won't necessarily have a transponder. A lot of people use this. A lot of people like it. A lot of people don't want transponders. I can't really say why, but it's there. It's there for people who want it. And then short-term account, 50 cents off, pay by mail. This is essentially for visitors or for rental car people, or for people that know that they're going to be here, know they're going to ride on a toll road. They can contact us, and we can set up a short-term account to make sure that they get their toll bills paid and can get a slight discount. Okay, so now I'm going to get into how our pay-by-mail works and talk a little bit about the civil penalty process that we talked about earlier. Our first toll bill goes out within 30 days of travel. You get a reminder if your bill isn't paid in 15 days. And you'll receive the second bill with a $5 reprocessing fee. If the toll bill isn't paid within 80 days, a $40 civil penalty is assessed for each of the unpaid toll transaction. And if you don't respond to the civil penalty within 20 days, we'll request a Department of Licensing place a hold on your vehicle registration, preventing renewal of tabs. So this was the pay-by-mail rules that we started off with, and we're pretty rigid, frankly, in the first couple years that we did pay-by-mail. And it, frankly, was difficult at times when we started getting phone calls from people who didn't quite understand the consequences of what we were talking about. And what I mean by that is that, we started hearing from customers that didn't receive their initial toll bills. They weren't familiar with the toll bill processes. And what that led to was some customers having some steeper toll bills because they weren't paying attention to their mail, or there was some reason that they didn't get the toll bills. And so it added up really rather quickly. And it resulted in a lot of phone calls to our customer service center, a lot of media attention, and a lot of consternation from our legislature on how the tolling pay-by-mail works. So where we ended up and where we landed in working with our partners and working with the legislature is that we have now what's called the Customer Program for Resolution. And this has been a great program for us to work with our customers and help them through the pay-by-mail process, but also to getting a transponder. And this, how it works is that if you call us up, we'll work with you to get all of your civil penalties waived. So we'll waive all those penalties and fees, which drastically reduces the bottom line for some of these people. And so, but as long as you pay all of your original toll bills, you'll get the rest of the fees waived. And if that happens again with the same driver, we'll waive the fees and penalties again, but we'll also insist that you open a Good to Go account as well. So that also is an incentive to make sure people understand and are managing their accounts. And then The third request, if that happens, it must submit a formal dispute to administrative law judge. But this has been a great success in not only from an education campaign, but really reducing the amount of hardship that sometimes this could cause on some of our customers. But it's a very small amount of people that wind up using this process. Only 2% of our trips wind up in customer program for resolution. So it's not a great amount, but it's really gone a long way to help us be flexible with our customers. And that's an important focus that I wanted to hit on today, is the flexibility that this provides not only the DOT, but our actual customer service people that are on the ground dealing with people who really have hardships and really didn't understand what they got themselves into. So having that flexibility goes a long way. So for fiscal 2018, nearly 84,000 had penalties waived, but we also collected $3.8 million in unpaid toll trips as well. So that is a huge plus for us to get the original tolls that were expected to be paid, got paid. So that was a lot in one session. I apologize if I went through quickly, but I think that's the end for me.
Shall we keep going through the panel? Do we want to save questions? I'm kind of creating a list, but does that work okay? Okay. Ms. Griffith, and then we'll just continue forward.
Good afternoon, Chair Boehne, members of the Commission. For the record, I'm Rima Griffith, Executive Director for the Washington State Transportation Commission. Today I'll be talking about the Commission's role and perspective in this puzzle of tolling that we operate with in Washington State. So tolling's not new to Washington State. We have, over the history of our state since the 40s, had toll bridges, a much more traditional approach to tolling. You build a bridge, they put a toll on it, when the bridge was paid for, the tolls went off. It's kind of our experience. That went on through the 80s, and then we really didn't toll until that Tacoma Narrows Bridge opened. So there was a long lag, if you will, for a lot of people who were not familiar with tolling when we resurrected tolling back for the Tacoma Narrows. We just put the rates there just out of interest to inflated them to today's dollars, just to kind of see what people were paying back then for the Longview, bridge alone, 75 cents, like $5.84 today. We were kind of surprised at really how relatively expensive some of these tolls were back then to pay for these facilities. And we didn't leave Eastern Washington out of it. We had the Maple Street Bridge in Spokane, 10-cent toll. One of our commissioners always used to say proudly that his mother would avoid that bridge because she was not paying the 10 cents no matter what. So nothing, not a new idea, but certainly as we fast forward to where we are in a more modern day setting, because of that hiatus from tolling, the state kind of came through, noticing what's going on across the country, asked the commission back in 2005 to conduct a comprehensive tolling study that really answered these core questions of if, where, when, and how tolls should be assessed. And what emerged from all that work was a set of 8 tolling policies recommended to the legislature. So the idea was to really think about a policy construct in state law that would set the foundation or the framework for tolling and how it would go forward in the state. In 2007, the commission was directed by the legislature to identify the early actions needed to carry out that 2005 study, and also to start setting forth some guiding principles and looking at illustrative projects and phasing plans across the state of where tolling might be feasible. These weren't investment grade studies, but certainly kind of looking at different facilities across the state to see, was it really just all about the Central Puget Sound, or was there other areas of the state that tolling might be a tool that the legislature could consider using to finance some of the projects across the state. So anyway, after we did those 2 studies in 2008, the legislature actually implemented the recommendations that the commission set forth, and it basically set the stage for tolling, keeping in mind that the Tacoma Narrows Bridge had already been authorized and had its own set of laws in place. So this was kind of after Tacoma Narrows, going forward for all toll facilities from that point. I won't read these to you, but this is just to give you a sense of the structure that really got adopted into law based on those recommendations in that first tolling study. There was a general, of course, policy of why you would toll and, of course, when to use it. And it was couched in this notion of contributing a significant portion of the cost of a project that can't be funded solely with existing sources and or to optimize performance. So we definitely were cognizant of managing capacity and demand, but definitely was heavy on the finance side when we first started this notion of tolling. Use of toll revenue was established in a broad way, but certainly set the markers. Setting toll rates, thinking about variable pricing to optimize, again, performance, and recognizing that necessary trade-off of generating revenue to finance something versus managing traffic, which has a little bit of a natural tension, and you have to find that sweet spot so that you can attempt to cover both sides. Duration of toll collections, thinking about how long they should be kept in place. The commission advocated they should never come off once they're put on. It's just like a house. There's always going to be maintenance, so perhaps the tolls go down someday once your financing's paid off, but you really need to get out of the habit of taking them off, which had been the historic practice. They established the commission as the state tolling authority, talked about DOT's implementation responsibilities, and then touched on the toll collection systems in the state being simple, unified, interoperable. So some very high-level policies that set the stage for tolling to roll forward. In the second study, we came out with guiding principles for advancing tolling, and these were kind of the things that we continue to use as markers today and are reflected in a lot of the statutory laws. Looking at system impact. So, we talk about tolling a facility or a segment of highway, but it's always important to think about the impact of the entire system. It's not just diversion to the local streets, but it's really thinking about how everything operates together, the consumer's use of these facilities, the options they have if they don't want to pay a toll, on and on that goes. Talking about, the legislature encouraging them to think about pre-construction tolling. So something we learned a little bit from the Tacoma Narrows is we did not have early tolling before the bridge opened, so we basically had to finance the early years of construction. So you're carrying a lot of debt and interest accumulation in those years where you're not tolling for those 2-3 years under construction. It's just kind of adding to that loan tab that you've got to pay off once your tolling does begin. On 520, we didn't do that. We started early tolling on the old bridge while the new bridge was being built. That really helped lower the total cost of that delivery of that project by allowing us to toll early. And it also allowed us to start managing traffic on the current facility while the new one was being built. So the public got an early taste and a little bit of an improved travel time, and it also helped with the financing in the long run. In terms of interstates, apply for federal waivers as early as possible on any project, as I'm sure you're well aware. Talking about duration of toll collections, stay on for the life of the facility. Public awareness and acceptance, we really tried to stress the need for public outreach and education. It's ongoing. It's not just about the start of a project or when we first start talking about tolling. It really needs to be an ongoing effort that you continue that relationship with the public. And also engaging the private sector effectively. Be open to alternative contract vehicles. And, don't just dismiss that role that they could potentially play in delivering a project and, of course, in operating it as well. So another version of the chart you've seen 3 times now. I won't go through all the columns. I'll focus on the yellow one that I like. You can see the treasurer is listed. We sometimes kept forgetting them in these early versions of this slide. And they were like, hello, we do all the financing. So yeah, you're an important role. So we want to acknowledge that. We actually work very closely with them, and they do play an active role, an ongoing role in our rate setting. So example for 520, when we go to set rates, and we go through this evaluation every year to see where we do it quarterly, but at the end of each fiscal year, we're definitely targeting being able to say, do we need to raise rates or not? Because we try to raise rates and have them in effect by the start of a fiscal year, so it's smooth with our budget and revenue flows. So we have them certify. They basically are required in the bond covenants to issue certifications of the toll rates that they will meet maintenance requirements, that they're going to meet the debt, and that it's not just the toll rates for that year. They're looking at the entire 25 to 30-year finance plan. So you look at that ripple effect. So if the commission were to say, this year we're going to hedge our bets and come in low because, we feel bad. People are paying a lot of money. We haven't done that yet. But if they were to do that, you don't think about it, but it doesn't just affect your revenues that year. It ripples out into all the years, and all of a sudden you have a much bigger gap you've got to make up later, which means huge toll hikes down the road. So you kind of are pushing your problem out. So it was good that they got us trained early on to think about the full financial picture, not just the year or two that we're into. The commission got into a process of trying to set rates instead of every year, trying to do it set them for 2 years. We realize traffic volumes, the economy changes, things can change volumes. but they've really tried to get more and more into the practice of setting a toll rate schedule with a lot of assumptions, and always warning the public it might change any given year. But the idea is to help that predictability of costs for people as they look ahead. And it also helps to ensure our bondholders that we do have a plan and we can demonstrate we're going to get there if all of our assumptions hold. And it also helps us kind of also not have to change rates every year and go through that kind of grueling, gut-wrenching process of telling people you're going to have to pay more. So when we set the rates initially, we really try to do that long-term look and do our best guess with a lot of information from the department on what the rate should be, not only today, but how we carry through into the future. So the best ideal situation is you're not changing rates very often or departing from that plan too much. So the commission, you can just see in this chart, sets those rates. They do a lot of outreach. They also can establish advisory committees, which is something they have not done on their own, although they can, but we do have an advisory committee for the Tacoma Narrows that was established in law, and the governor appoints those people. It was an interesting trial in getting community input from the users of the communities around the bridge that are most likely to be using this bridge the most frequently. And it kind of puts some folks on the ground in the communities to give us that input as to what they think is reasonable. And it's been interesting over the years. I mean, Roy, jump in if you want anytime. We get along and we do most of the time follow their advice, but there have been years where, that urge to keep rates low kind of overtakes our advice, and they might want to push the envelope a little on the risk side, and the commission would err more on the financial conservation side, I guess. And so we've had some disagreements over there what the rates should be, but they're advisory, and we think it's a good process. But we haven't really replicated it as of yet because we kind of feel like between the department and the direct public outreach, we haven't seen enough reason to set up more advisory committees on the ground at this point. So anything you would like to add, Ron?
No, you're doing good.
Okay. So basically today in the law, and this is very generally stated, but all toll revenue collected from a facility has to be used to construct, improve, preserve, maintain, manage, and operate the facility in which it's collected. So basically the legislature is saying you better cover your costs. This is a fully self-supported exercise. And, we're going to help get the financing for it. But after that, the toll payers are going to cover this facility. So they are always subject to appropriation and can only be made to cover those items listed there. But on the note of providing for the operations of moving people or goods, that is a politically hot topic. It does imply the potential for maybe using toll revenue for some form of transit contribution of some kind. We have, at this point, have not done any revenue sharing, if you will, or looked at any subsidization with transit. And I think that's largely because the commission really has made it a higher priority to try to keep the rates as low as possible. And for every cost we're trying to cover or revenue sharing agreement we're trying to meet, that requires a little more in that toll rate to generate that revenue. And so at this point, that has not been something that has been moved forward or acted upon. And each toll facility, when the legislature authorizes these, they'll do a section of law just for that facility authorizing it, and they'll restate this overall purpose. Sometimes it's a little different. For the most part, it's pretty consistent. And they may set up special rules or a special note for a facility that might be unique to the others, but they don't typically depart from this general blueprint of how they advance it. One of the other things that we do struggle with from time to time during each session is the urge to help us do our job and try to pass bills that suggest people with blue cars on Wednesday should be exempt, things like that. And so we kind of help go over and talk through why we really don't want to start that process of having laws passed to create exemptions or affect toll policy. And it's frankly very critical to the bonding and the credit rating we have for these kinds of exercises, because we really have to demonstrate that the toll authority is independent and basically has a protection around it from political influence or other influences. So basically the toll authority has to be able to do its job independently and do what it needs to do to ensure all those costs are covered and revenues are generated. And so political influence is kind of a big no-no. And so we've been able to keep that discipline in place so far. And work with the legislature in trying to find areas of way we can kind of meet maybe their interests without passing laws that require certain exemptions or toll policies. So getting to setting rates, it actually takes a long time. We start with the legislature. They get to pick the toll projects. So they have to, after the department may go through its initial feasibility assessments and, you know, comes out saying, yeah, this project or this highway will be a good candidate, and they check all the boxes. The legislature ultimately has to be the body that says this project or this highway is now authorized to be tolled. That then triggers a much more, I guess, formal, robust process, and that's typically, you know, we're in a ballpark about 5 years out before tolls actually start. And oftentimes the department will establish a stakeholder advisory committee made up of a lot of public officials and interest groups surrounding the area of the facility and start the early conversations around, gosh, everything from the project design to how it's going to be financed. Is there local contribution requirements? For example, the 167-509 Gateway project that was mentioned earlier by Ed, you know, has a very active community group that's been in place for like 3 years now. And they have been at the table working with the department, talking about their preferences or concerns about tolling down the road and things they'd like to be considered. So it's kind of a good way to start getting everybody working together very early on. And then the commission, as I mentioned, can also do its own advisory committees, but we typically don't do that. And if we do, it's later on in the process. This is much more focused on a broader vision of how the project, the financing, and the toll setting will all fit together. So then about 3 years out, we really start diving into our detailed work in close collaboration with the department, assessing traffic and revenue data, looking at all the legal and financial requirements more closely, really diving into cost estimates that are continually refined. Various toll rate scenarios start being selected and looked into and researched. Investment grade modeling is applied. So we're really starting to delve into the what ifs around not just the rates, but the rate structure. Where should the peak periods be set versus the shoulder periods? Should there be overnight tolling? I mean, there's all these things you wrestle with, and these models really help us see what impacts it will have to traffic flows, to volumes on the tolled facility. Will it drive it up or down? There's a lot of things that are not intuitive that we learn through this process, where you think people would or wouldn't use the facility. We find that they will. So it's always insightful and very detailed work. We also look at exemptions and time-of-day pricing schedules, dynamic versus variable. So there's all these things that are being considered and traded off, and it takes a lot of time to really go through that. The commission will oftentimes set rate-setting goals and objectives to serve kind of as guideposts, and these are very high levels. Like, for example, on the 99 tunnel, you know, they just had a few, and it's unique by each facility, depending on what's going on. So for the tunnel, it's going through downtown. There's all this construction happening on the surface streets. It's just crazy time in Seattle. And so the last thing the city wants is a whole bunch of traffic when the tolls start deciding to use the city streets that are already clogged. So, you know, one of our guiding principles was, you know, minimize the toll rates in the early years. I mean, really go as low as we possibly can. We want to minimize any possibility of diversion. So obviously the lower the toll rate, the better. You know, there may be elasticity to go higher, but you want to stay on the very low end, maybe even on the bleeding edge of the low end, because we know we can make it up later, just so we don't add to the traffic and operational challenges that are going to exist over the next 5 years or so while all this construction on the waterfront downtown is happening. You know, we also had as a principle to provide sustainable toll rates that meet all legal and financial obligations. So again, thinking about finding that financial plan and that toll rate plan and setting that forth, considering we wanted to start out really low. And lastly, just trying to support facility performance and consistent toll payer experience across all toll facilities. So while we think about all these facilities kind of being added on one by one over time, we've had to go back and kind of realign our rules and our policies, because we started ending up with some varying policies by facility, which adds to confusion and makes it a little bit more difficult to be operated and managed. So, you know, we work on that, and then we have a subcommittee of commissioners. There's 7 commissioners on our commission, so 3 of them serve on a tolling team, and they meet monthly and they really get into the weeds on all of this. And then we, of course, loop in the full commission quite frequently as well. And we begin our direct outreach with key local partners and impacted agencies. So in addition to all the work the department's been doing, now we start directly reaching out to folks in the area and trying to cultivate an even, more active conversation and input process to make sure we're understanding their concerns and the ways this may or may not impact them and what's important to them. So about a year and a half out, we're really going now, and the formal rate setting schedule is set and it's publicized, and people know it's coming by this point. There's been a lot of public outreach. Media engagement is really picked up. Local meetings are being held, both with stakeholders and organizations and local government folks, but we also start the process of getting direct public input. So we go into the community and we start holding local meetings, public meetings in the evening, encouraging people to come out, and we may have, let's say 3 or 4 different toll scenarios that we've whittled down through this analysis process. And we put it out there for the public to take a look at. And in this process, we also talk about the kind of requirements we have to meet. And the point of all that is to say, we don't have a lot of wiggle room to just arbitrarily decide how much money we're going to raise each year. We have very hard targets we have to hit. It's all backed up by investors, so we can't miss it. And so there's not a lot of play here. And for every place we decide to discount, we got to make up for it somewhere else. So as we talk to the public about the specifics of a toll facility and the possible rates, we're also trying to educate about how tolling works, also publicizing the ability to get to good go, set up your account and be ready, but trying to help people understand the perspective that we have to operate in. We let people come, of course, these people can come to the meetings, but they can also email us, they can write us, they can call us. We have a lot of conversations with people one-on-one, listening to their concerns. And then after we take all this input, the commission will really hone in on a proposal that is likely then going to be the rates. And that gets put out usually in the springtime, and then about 30 days later, kind of based on our state's rulemaking requirements, we have about a minimum of 30 days between each step that we have to wait. They'll put out that proposal, they'll hold a formal hearing about 30 days later, they'll take further testimony, and then they wrap up and adopt, and then they have about a 30-day wait before they're in effect. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, a lot of process and study that happens leading up to this final action. When we think about toll exemptions and discounts, it really comes down to being, in essence, a zero-sum game. As I mentioned, the law requires us to cover our costs. We have hard targets we have to hit. So every time we give a discount, we've got to make it up. Or there's got to be some kind of subsidy or alternative revenue source that fills in that gap. So they're very, very, very careful about discounts, and basically have taken an everyone pays scenario, with the exception of transit, who just this last year was made exempt on every facility. They were exempt on everything but Tacoma Narrows, and on Tacoma Narrows they remained, being told until, well, I guess it hasn't actually took effect yet. It's effective, but it hasn't been implemented yet while the back office goes into effect. But they will be getting an exemption. So that was a big step. And there was a lot of controversy, interestingly, around that, because there's a lot of people that think, transit should pay. And on the Tacoma Narrows in particular, there's no congestion really. So, where's the benefit? On 520, you can argue these buses are moving a lot of people on a very congested corridor, so it helps with that throughput. But the commission really felt strongly that transit should be exempt, because it really is part of the bigger picture of policy objectives we have in our state and in our laws around lowering emissions, lowering VMT, encouraging multimodalism. So for all the right reasons, they went ahead and made that consistent across all toll facilities, and that will be the case going forward. One caveat to that policy, though, is under federal regulation, when you give public transit an exemption, you also have to offer that to private transit providers. So there was a little bit of a slippery slope there, and we'll be working, that'll be a little bit of a new territory for us, but that will be something that comes along with that we'll be watching in terms of potential impacts. Lastly, just toll policy consistency is very important. As I mentioned, they did take that step to make everything consistent across the facilities to the extent we can. Express toll lanes versus a bridge like a Tacoma Narrows with a flat rate, They're very different types of facilities, but we try to keep the rules as consistent as possible so that people feel very comfortable using these different facilities and not really wondering, am I going to get charged for something I didn't know about, or is it okay for me to get, do I get an HOV exemption or not? So it's really important. It also reduces administrative efforts and supports parity between the communities where these tolled facilities are, because oftentimes we do have a lot of comparisons that happen between Tacoma and Seattle as far as what one group is paying versus the other. So, you know, the other thing to consider as we think about tolling is while we have express tollings that are really designed to manage traffic, they have to cover their costs. Revenue definitely is not the driver. It is all about managing traffic and giving people a reliable trip. You can make money on that, but the commission has long said and cautioned the legislature that it's not a source you can 100% rely on because it's based on the whim of the drivers to use it based on congestion. So it gets a little more dicey around the ability to bond against it. It's not impossible, and our legislature now this session is trying to find ways to pull that revenue and as part of the call on those bonds that they want to issue for the southern portion. But it can be done, but it's just something you have to think about. 520 is a variable schedule, so people can see the price changes by time of day, so we address managing traffic in that manner. It's not variable on the minute, but it also helps us raise the revenue that we need to raise. And in the law, it actually says you need to raise revenue and also manage traffic. So there is a way to do a hybrid approach. It's just doing only express tollings is a little bit different animal in terms of that reliability. Some of the financing lessons we've learned over the years is that it was really the Tacoma Narrows that taught us the most because it was our first step in this direction. The way that was financed was almost like an analogous to an adjustable rate mortgage. The loan payments started out really low, and the assumption was traffic volumes were going to grow with the economy, and if that growth rate was there, everything was going to be fine. It was okay that those debt payments were going to keep climbing a lot. And unfortunately, the recession hit in 2008, and we saw a reversal of that. And we saw some pretty steep toll hikes just to keep our revenues where they needed to be, and that, of course, did not go well with the public or with the legislature. There was nothing we could do about that because of the way it was financed. The Treasurer's Office did all they could do, but what we learned is doing financing with a flat debt service payment schedule is highly recommended and is how we've rolled forward on all our toll facilities moving forward. Establishing reserve funds to reduce financial risk and support stable toll rates is also critical. Again, Tacoma Narrows did not have a reserve requirement. So the commission set forth a reserve. We call it the sufficient minimum balance requirement. That, again, is not well liked by the public. They think it's a savings account and that money, they shouldn't have to pay for that money to go in there. Whereas everything going forward, of course, these reserves are built into the financing plan with the bond market. And so it's just part of the cost that we have to cover. Fund balances, you have to maintain them to mitigate against future downturns, so it's really critical that they're there. And then again, a toll rate escalation plan is really important with a lot of assumptions to be made, but it's always there to again, give predictability and help make sure that you're as stable and predictable as you can going into the future. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Well, you make it sound so easy. It's almost like, well, good, there it is. We can just follow this roadmap, and it's going to...
That's right.
So I still have been populating. I don't know if we want to go to the next pieces or if
sure.
we'll just kind of go through the whole panel. Does that work?
Back to Kate.
Might as well.
Okay. And I suspect that our last portion for the day, for those that might be panicking in terms of where we are on the agenda, I suspect that won't take a full 45, so we'll, I think this is really critical, and we have guests from out of town, so I want to make sure that we extract all the information that we can from you while you're here. So please, I'll turn it right over to you, Kate.
All right. My name is Catherine Jones. I'm with the Office of Innovation in Oregon Department of Transportation, and David Ungama, who's on the opposite end of the table. So we're going to do this together. So this is kind of like a tolling system 101 about how tolling systems work. And I think tolling is going to be a very big part of your life. And so this is just to provide a very bedrock understanding with how data is transferred and what that means. So that when you hear presentations like this, you kind of have, a little bit of, you have some vocabulary to back it up. The key takeaways that I want to convey right now that Oregon has learned, talking to our partners in Washington, California, which, by the way, we really want to thank them. They have been amazing. Every time we call, they pick up, even though they see an Oregon number. And it could be anywhere from a very complex policy that we need help walking through, or like an acronym that we have no clue what it is. And so they've been great. The key takeaways for today is that tolling system design depends on tolling policy. So tolling policy is set, and from that you create an IT system. And just a reminder, and I'm sure that you're well aware, that this is a big and a public IT project. It has all the feelings of a major construction project with the stakeholder involvement, but when you turn around, you're not going to be building a bridge, you're going to be building an IT project that's going to flip on. And that this is a new business line for ODOT. And I'm going to walk you through the options on system procurement. So when we first got Section 120 in House Bill 2017, I attempted to call all the tolling authorities in the United States and ask them lessons learned, failures and successes, and so this presentation kind of comes out of what we learned through that. But policy decisions really frame a tolling system, and you guys have a lot of decisions in front of you, such as tolling objective, what you want to do about freight, what you want to do about emerging technology, how you want to use the revenue, and so forth. And once those decisions are made, you turn that into a tolling system. Rima touched on this, and this is something I certainly learned as I called other tolling authorities. Is tolling objectives is going to be very important when you design your system. And the reason is I would call tolling authorities and they say, what are you doing this for? And I'd say, well, we want to raise revenue, mitigate congestion. And the immediate response was, no. What's your alpha objective? Are you raising revenue? Are you mitigating congestion? And it's not that the two are mutually exclusive. It's that you build a system to really accommodate one or the other. And when in its purest form, a revenue generator is a point toll. It's very simple. It just wants $3 per car, no matter the time of day. It doesn't worry itself with exemptions or equity programs. It just wants that $3 per car. When you start moving toward congestion mitigation systems, that's almost where the roadway becomes alive, right? It's constantly talking to a back-end system that's asking it, how are you doing? How are you doing? What's it like? Oh, you're getting congested. Okay, let's pull some levers. How are you doing now? And they usually integrate those systems with their traffic management systems. And it's almost like a living thing when you start moving toward the congestion management part. You want people to not pay a toll and take a trip on a bus. You want people to pay a lower toll by going at a less congested time. You want to manage that system. And so, again, they're not mutually exclusive, but they have different objectives. And that needs to be kept in mind. Not only do you have a lot of policy decisions coming at you, but there are layers of decisions that go underneath each policy decision, and I'm going to walk you through just one. One is, let's say that HOVs are important to you. You want to recognize HOVs on your toll system. Well, what do you define that to be? Is it 3 licensed drivers in a vehicle, or is it just 2 heartbeats, a woman and her 3-month-old baby? So how do you define an HOV? Once you define that, how do you want to verify that? Do you want a switchable toll tag that once you go under a gantry, the gantry reads that that's a HOV car? Do you want, there's cameras along some toll facilities to take a picture inside the car to verify that it's an HOV? Sometimes there's an app that you can take a picture before you start your trip, and it can count the faces in it and then validate through metadata that that is indeed your vehicle. So how do you want to verify that policy decision? Once you do, what does it mean to you? Is it free tolls for HOVs? Is it 50% off tolls for HOVs? Is it free tolling Tuesdays? So what does that mean to you? And then how do you want to enforce that? So enforcement, enforcement's not one thing that you're going to decide once. It's your policy decisions. You have to look at each of those and think, how am I going to enforce this? So for HOVs, do state police monitor the gantries? Or do you have maybe more of an honor system, which some tolling authorities do use? Just trust that when people say they're HOV, they're HOV. That encourages leakage, but it's an option. So this all comes to the remarkable conclusion that there is no such thing as an off-the-shelf tolling system. They are custom built for that tolling authority because policy differs so widely across the United States, and the layers of decision underneath that policy vary as well. So Tolling 101, this is what tolling systems all have in common. And basic data flow that I think will help you as people come to talk about tolling systems. The first is the data collector. You're going to hear this term, and what that essentially means is the gantries. The gantries, and they have roadside equipment that's on the side of the road. And they just gobble data. And they gobble whatever data you tell them to. It's almost always vehicle identification, time of day, and the date. But they can also gobble, axle counts, vehicle volume, HOV capacity, and so forth. So the data collector, it doesn't try to understand data, it just collects it. It then moves that over to a transaction processor, and that's when the data becomes a little bit more intelligent. A transaction processor will notice, okay, I see toll tag 123 hit at this time. Oh, toll tag 123 hits again here. This must be a trip. Okay, how much was that trip? Okay, I'm going to pull the toll rate. This trip was $3.10. So it connects the trips and it assigns a value to that trip. The transaction processor then submits that to an account manager. And I split account manager out into two different forms. You have the technical, and that's the automatic process of grabbing the data from the transaction processor, identifying the vehicle driver and the vehicle, and then posting that on the driver's, account. So when they log in, they can see, oh, I just spent $3.10 traveling here. And then you have the account management people, which Ed talked a lot about, which is managing people that call in, they want toll tags, they have a concern over an invoice, they don't know what's going on. So you have the people side of that as well with your account management system. And then that all goes up to your administration system and aggregated data and money. So the lingo around here is they refer to the transaction processor and account management as back office, and then data collector and roadside equipment are typically synonymous. So this is where tolling systems differ, and we have called a lot of tolling authorities, and again, we went to California. We actually have another grant to go out to I-95 corridor to look at their systems and their as well. So there are several different procurement methods right now in the tolling industry. One is single contract, one is best in class, and then we'll talk about Oregon's kind of mobility marketplace in a second. Single contract, this is the same data flow that you've seen. What they do is a tolling authority gets tolling authority, and they turn to a vendor and say, just build it. Just here you go, build it. And so a tolling vendor will then usually use their own requirements and build that entire process from data collection all the way up to some parts of administration. When we talked to vendors, when we called toll authorities about this, they refer to this as black box contract administration. It's kind of like, I have no idea how my car works. So when it starts kind of, going downhill, I take it to mechanic. Mechanic's like, oh, it's your carburetor and it's $800. I don't know what a carburetor is. I don't know if it's important. I don't know if $800 is a good price. Same thing here. When a toll vendor, they have no idea how their toll system works. So when a vendor comes and says, I need $2 million for a system upgrade, well, I don't know if that's necessary, but I mean, you're locked into the system. You really don't have much of a choice. These are proprietary systems. They're meant for tolling and tolling alone. States have reported, so all these lessons learned come from tolling authorities. States have reported there's minimal incentives for these vendors to exceed performance until they get to the end of the contract time frame, and then they really start performing well. And they have a comparatively high administration costs. The pros are that this is a single point of accountability, so when something goes wrong, you know who to point your finger at, which some states found very soothing. And they do have reduced implementation costs, and that's because you have fewer procurements, you're only going out once, and there's no need to coordinate multiple vendor systems. That vendor is responsible for doing that. This is best-in-class contracts, so our neighbors to the north are going this way, and so is California as well, where, again, the same data flow, you take it, but they start moving certain aspects out, and then they create a contractor on each of those. So they have a roadside equipment contract, a back office contract, and a customer service contract. And so basically the tolling authority separates functions into different procurements, and they can award the best in class for each segment. So you can get the best in class for each the best contract for the best function. And this, you don't have vendors managing other vendors with completely different business models. You don't have a data collector managing a customer service vendor. You can choose the best out of each, and then the state can manage those contracts on its own, which states have found very, very helpful. And I'm sure Ed can kind of talk to that. You have better insight. The state has better insight into how it works, how the tolling system works, and how data moves. The cons that we've heard, especially coming out of California, is that if you have a different data collector and you have a different back office system, the back office vendor will say, you're gonna talk to me in this way. And then the data collector says, no, 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 I'm transmitting data like this, and you're going to accept it. And so they get into those during procurement and during system build, they'll get into those little squabbles. And so that is a downside to this. And it is still a proprietary system built to administer tools. So kind of stepping back a little bit, I come from RUC, which is, a different transportation financing mechanism. And stepping back a little bit, what government does is it sets up almost a proprietary system for every single initiative that it has. And so every single time that we have a parking initiative, we set up a parking system. So a lot of these IT systems go through that data flow, but we set up our own little proprietary system for each key portion. And so that may be nice for us and easy for us when it comes to project launch, but it makes it hard for the user because now I have to manage all of these accounts. I have to open these accounts, I have to pay these accounts, and I have to manage these accounts. And so that makes it highly inconvenient for the user. Because Oregon is coming into tolling at this time, and as I'm sure you've heard, technology in vehicles is exploding, and what people can do with technology is substantially increasing. It's an amazing time actually to come into tolling, and to not only gather lessons learned from our neighbors, but to also kind of leverage what we have done with Orgo, where we can really flip that model around and instead start bundling transportation services and start being interoperable truly with other states and with other tolling authorities to really make it a user-focused system. And we do that through something called standardized requirements. So what has happened is when people start tolling, it's like they go into a field and they create their own game. They create their own game. And when the federal government came on board, they said, you know what, you guys really need to be interoperable by October 2016. And that's been very difficult because they have these proprietary standards that don't speak the same language. They're not playing the same game. And so it's how do you convert 3 under par to 5 soccer goals? How does that conversion play? It's nearly impossible. And so what Oregon did kind of with Orgo, and what we want to keep on maybe looking into with tolling is really creating the rule book of, okay, guys, let's all get in a room. How do we want to talk? What do we want to say? And then that will allow our systems to be interoperable, and it will allow us to make a multi-use platform for not only tolling, but for RUC and for Orgo and for other things. And not only that, but you will be able to have kind of like almost the amount of data, like if I really want to assess how much it's going to cost me to drive my car to Portland, private vehicle or rail or transit, I can start comparing and contrasting those costs. And then, so this is how it works. What we do is same data field right here. We define, we work with Washington, we have the requirements. We work with HotPass, we have the requirements. We define what it means to be a data collector. We define what it means to be a transaction processor and account manager. We define how the rules are done in that game. And then we define how they talk to each other. So instead of us getting a tolling authority and turning around to a vendor and saying, build this, we define what that means. We work with our partners and define that. And then when we launch tolling, you can have what would look like a typical toll system when you first launch, where they issue a toll tag, you get one vendor to do that, and then maybe after 5 years of success, you publish those requirements, and you allow people to start competing. You allow different account managers to come in and offer roadside assistance and tolling, offer insurance and parking and RUC. And you allow users to pick the one that they want with the right bundle of services that they want, so that they can start bundling their services and start having a more connected transportation experience. What we've done with that, so the mobility marketplace, as we've seen with RUC, and Washington has also been partners with us on the RUC journey, is that when you publish your requirements, you allow the private sector to come in and compete. These systems, they just provide, we expect you to collect X, Y, and Z data, and how they collect it is really up to the private sector or up to innovation. And so these type of systems are very, they can evolve with technology and they can evolve with policy. You're not locked into one contract. You're not locked into a single solution. The cost could be potentially shared amongst multiple agencies, right? So if you're all pooling from the same bedrock of data, you can start sharing those costs with HotPass and so forth. This can be grown incrementally. Like I said, you can launch with a typical tolling-like system, publish your requirements, and allow competition in a marketplace. And most importantly, I think this is convenient for drivers. The cons to this is actually this conversation right now. this is not easy to understand. When you talk to IT people, this is the language that they deal in, and this is how the private sector has done business for decades. When it comes to government and IT, it's harder to wrap your mind around how this works, but this is how the internet works, right? So the internet says if you want to post a web page, you have to do it within these rules, and that allows you, when you enter into the internet, you can go to a series of web pages. You're not having to open up different browsers to go to a subset. They all operate on the same rules. And then another con to this is it's going to take us time to sit down with our partners and build consensus on what the language we want to operate is in, how we want to play our game. And we can't do that in a silo. We have to work with partners and decide, okay, guys, we need to get over proprietary systems, and how are we really going to innovate and talk so we can instantaneously share data and money, and what does that look like? And working with them to figure that out. So when it comes to tolling, what you've mainly been hearing for is the PAC. So that's been the Region 1 effort. And we certainly, on the back end, have not been idle. We've been gathering requirements from anybody that will throw them at us. So Washington has been great at giving us their tolling system requirements. California, we have all their tolling system requirements. Hot Pass, we have Hot Pass's tolling system requirement, or Hot Pass's requirements. Orgo, Motor Carrier, so E-Road, their system requirements on how their systems talk. Western operate. So, like I said, tolling authorities are trying to become more interoperable. It's hard with proprietary systems, but they're trying. And so this is kind of their initial stab at it. We also have our requirements from our signage people, because if we do dynamic price our toll systems, we're going to learn how to talk to them. And then I-95 corridor. This is being done in I-95 corridor. How they build their systems among multiple states is not that they all have the same vendor. It's that they all have the same requirements, and then they each go out to procurement for their own vendor, but those systems can talk because they're built off of the same language. We've been heavily working with other tolling authorities, and again, we're very grateful for all of their help and understanding and pity, and they've been really great. And then we have been working with the private sector. And of course, the private sector is very much looking at this. I mean, there's a lot of companies launching that are going to connect you to your Nest at home, to your vehicle, to getting groceries loaded in your trunk and getting your vehicle filled with fuel right before you leave work. So we're all becoming more connected. And Orgo kind of proved the path that open architecture, that going toward a more standardized requirements, it does work. It's a little bit harder on the front end, but it has its rewards on the back end, and it is functional. And so that's what we've been up to.
Questions?
See if I can get this to work. Oh my goodness. Well, it's a lot of information. So I'm not even sure where to start. Just maybe I'll turn it to my colleagues. Do you have burning, right? Okay. Well, I'll take a stab at the basics of where we are in our process. Obviously, we're at the beginning stages of putting this framework together. So one of the challenges that we've run into is the connection between the local system, the maybe even legislative support, maybe even some federal concerns about from legislative activity of whether or not this is the direction we should be going. Did you experience that in terms of there's the diversion piece onto the local system, and that has come forward, and there's concern there about what does this mean? And then maybe even legislators that would say that this isn't a direction that we should be going, and I'm not quite sure of another option. And we've said, well, if not this, then what? Did you experience some of that out of the gate in 05? And is that what I'm hoping to hear is yes, and it all subsided, and now we're just, the barbecues are just fabulous.
Every weekend.
Every weekend, good. Well, then there's that answer. It is one of the pieces of the reality for me of, getting us down this road is we have some that don't feel that this is the direction that we should maybe go. And so I just wanted to know your experience of both on the local level of we don't want it to happen because they're hearing it from their constituency, and then also those other pieces too. So any comments?
I mean, I'll start from the legislative perspective. I think what really helped Washington lift tolling was the legislature saying, let's look at this in a deliberative from a research standpoint. So go do this study and come tell us the basic framework and what we need to think about as legislators to set up that policy framework of which everything's going to roll forward from. And that helped get the legislative consensus. There's always going to be a faction of legislators that don't like tolling, don't support it, and don't think it's the right approach. But the majority needs to be there to get these laws in place. And so when we went through that 2-year process, it wasn't just study. We did a lot of public outreach, focus groups. It was a very comprehensive effort. So when we reported back to the legislature, we had done a lot of the groundwork statewide around looking at possibilities and really boiling it down to here's a framework you really as lawmakers need to think about if this is the approach you want to take, so that when, where, and how to toll was critical, because it's not a tool for every place and everything. It's got limited application. And so that helped them, I think, bring focus into how they wanted to move forward. And it gave us the support and the consistency, I guess, in policy that allowed us to get out of that tug of war, if you will, of answering those core questions of, is this the right thing? Is this the right thing? It's like we agreed up front what that framework was. And so then after that, it got a lot smoother because everybody's roles kind of got identified. And in their case, they wanted to keep the authority to ultimately authorize toll facilities because that really gave them some ownership. And it ensured that the department or us didn't go forward with something that we thought was a great idea, and they might, have a easier time saying, well, that was a really bad idea because now the community doesn't like it or there's issues. So it really is a teamwork. I can't stress how important it is, regardless of your authority, to always make sure you're as much as possible on the same page with the lawmakers as much as possible. And the more you can get from them on lawmaking to help define your job will help you do it with less question and with more certainty of how you should proceed versus, kind of trying to find your way. So I think for us that was really critical in launching it. And it certainly had bumps after that, but that really helped us get on the same page of who's doing what and what our roles are. And then from then on, we started kind of clicking into these actual facilities and started following the process. And it becomes kind of a regiment now for all of us as far as we know what the steps are when something comes up and it's looking like a promising project. The process starts again. We're looking at US 2, and we're looking at a variety of spots right now that are those early stages, and the legislators are at the table. So it's really important to keep them involved, at least those that are from those districts around the area. So that would be my suggestion. I think that's how it has worked well for us moving forward.
So I'll talk a little bit about diversion and concerns there. On projects that we've had where there's always concern about diversion, and what we do to try and manage that is, at the beginning we do a lot of these traffic and revenue studies that I mentioned earlier that model to great detail in some aspects about how traffic is going to behave on some of these systems, what happens in the existing state, what happens after tolls are implemented, and to try and get an idea of how things are going to work and then at the end and how much revenue is possible. So a lot of that planning is going into it, and a lot of that modeling is going to go into it. That's going to inform the policymakers, going to inform you and the legislators about what we expect to happen. It's forecasting, though. It's not exact science, but it's forecasting done by experts that do traffic and revenue for investment grades for tolling. So they have a lot at stake associated with this traffic and revenue to help policymakers like our commission set rates to set some of these revenue targets. So we do think about diversion before it happens for quite a long time, and we think long and hard about that before the project actually happens. But what we also do, and when we talked about how important your data and data systems are, is that we set up a performance monitoring schema where we go out and monitor not only the roadways in question, state roadways in our case, or interstate, but we also monitor performance on local roadways that might be candidates for diversion. So we can quantify exactly with hard data about what it was like before tolling and what it was like after tolling. So we can be very specific and show hard data about how things have changed to talk about it in a very factual manner. So there is a lot of concern about diversion, and those concerns are valid. But if you go into it with your eyes wide open and you're transparent about it, and you can talk about hard data after it, it's also very helpful. And we find that, like on 405, where there was a lot of concerns about diversion, there was at first, but we've seen things stabilize over time, and sort of the really concern about the disaster that was going to happen didn't happen, or didn't happen to the degree that some people predicted. So I think having a data-driven approach is very important for that, and working together with your locals about what may or may not happen, and perhaps what can be mitigated, or how you can work together to work on some of those mitigative efforts, I think is really important.
Great. And a follow-up on, so in terms of, Rima, you had mentioned about any discounts or, Blue Car Wednesdays or whatnot. So if I understand you correctly, you took the approach that if there would be any discounts, that would really need to be offset somewhere, and that would maybe need to be a legislative request, or you identified the amount of money that you needed and then backed into that essentially any sort of, is that essentially how you ended up?
Yeah, I think the commission, at least in the early years, really wanted to keep it simple, so they took this everybody pays approach. And it avoided a lot of clamor around the idea that even there was hope, because they made it kind of clear at the beginning. The fairest form of tolling is everybody pays, because every time we give one user group a discount or a free pass, everybody else has to make up the difference, and nobody liked that. So it kind of helped keep the expectation down. But I think as our experience went on, clearly transit became an issue, and also HOVs we still aren't totally consistent on. I mean, we make them pay on Tacoma Narrows and they pay on 520, but they're free in the express tollings if you meet the 3 or 2+ by time of day. So we've got a variable policy there, but it's a slippery slope, and it's a hard one to quantify. So like right now, we mentioned at lunch, the legislature right now had a bill. There's a bill in play that deals with low-income toll discounts. And the commission has been pretty consistent to say that's a social equity issue that we think a social service agency should deal with, and that transportation has to be paid for, so we'd rather you try to address that through a social welfare type program, and maybe it can be handled there. Because the toll system, it's very difficult to enforce, first of all. We kind of wrestle with how would we know if that car crossing the bridge is really the person who was eligible for that benefit. Do they loan their car to somebody? So there's these worries from a pure transportation operational standpoint that we struggle with. But it's not to say the policy doesn't have merit. So we've talked with legislators, and it looks like we will enter this first real kind of bigger idea of a possible user group discount through a study is where it's headed. And I think what we are always pushing is go in with your eyes wide open and know what you're doing and understand the options and the risks. Because there's going to be implementation challenges, there's going to be enforcement challenges, there will definitely be revenue loss. So how do we want to deal with that? Is somebody going to make up that difference? Is it going to be handled on the social service side, or do they want the toll division to handle it? And what will be the impacts on these toll facilities? Does it change the makeup, the use? Does it get more people in the express tollings that then drives the overall rate up for everybody, because now there's a user group that maybe couldn't afford it before but maybe now can, and all of a sudden there's a 5% increase in volumes, and that drives the algorithm to setting the rate higher? We don't know. I mean, I guess the point is we don't know, and so we've at least got them to agree to let us really study it and come back with some guidance, and ultimately let the commission work through it. With reporting to the legislature on it. So I think it's definitely requires a lot of research, but it's something we don't try to do too often, because it really is very difficult to contain once you start going down that road. Other toll authorities oftentimes will do revenue sharing with transit, for example, as a mitigation measure. Some form of either that or free passage in the express toll lanes, which they have. So at least they have a reliable lane they can get in, and they know they're going to make their headways and they're going to stay on schedule. They're not going to get stuck in traffic with everybody else. So that alone is a great perk, and we've seen great benefits on their performance in our express toll lanes just with having them there and them not paying tolls. So that helps. Do we go to the next step and share revenue? We haven't gotten there yet. So there's always this trade-off analysis that you're doing on trying to weigh the pros and the cons, and there's no black and white rule on it, but at the end of the day, it becomes a zero-sum game because we have a bottom line we have to hit. So.
Sure, did you have a comment that you wanted to make as well? Please, jump in.
No, I was going, but she covered it, so okay. She does that a lot with me.
Okay. It's good that you're a team. Please.
With all of this data collection, and I don't know where to focus this question, but with all of this data collection, I think one of the things that we're looking at is through the Portland metro area, we're trying to move a lot of commodity. We have a lot of truckers trying to get north. And within the Portland metro area, there's a lot of folks using the interstate system to get from home to work. Have you had any ability to break down and look at, have there been benefits to freight mobility from this structure?
Well, one of the projects that's coming that I touched on was the Gateway project. That is a freight-focused project that has a tolling aspect to it. So that, I think, will be our biggest foray into how freight mobility is going to be benefited by tolling. But I am not aware that we've done any real data digging on how our existing toll facilities might benefit freight travel times and that sort of thing. We do have, this is not necessarily associated with mobility, but we do have different toll rates for larger vehicles as well. So I mean, there's not exemption for those. But as far as a mobility study on our existing facilities, I'm not aware of one. But we are heading that direction with the Gateway project, and so there will be a lot of focus on how freight performs with these brand new roadways being built, getting into and out of the ports of Seattle and Tacoma.
What about feedback just from the trucking industry? I mean, have you said, "Oh, this is great," you know? Not that I ever think a trucker is going to say that.
I have not heard a lot of complaint from the freight industry or from truckers themselves, and I'm not aware of that. We get a lot of those in our call center. We work with commercial clients where we have toll tags for our commercial clients, and I think those relationships are pretty good.
Yeah, I think generally we have a kind of compounding multiplier by axle, and over the years the commission has wondered, if that's the right calculator. But honestly, the freight industry has not rallied or contacted us or even testified that they're concerned with the way it's set. So we take that as assuming they think it's equitable and fair and reasonable considering their size and weight. But I think overall everybody benefits when you toll a facility because the throughput becomes more reliable. There is a price, but time is money for freight movers. And so I think they see those trade-offs and those advantages. I think when we start working on this other project and connecting up the Port of Tacoma with our freeway and giving them a more direct route, kind of like they have down the Port of LA Long Beach, that will be more telling. But so far they have been very supportive of this notion because they really want to get out of traffic. Sitting on I-90 or trying to get down to the Port of Seattle is a nightmare, frankly, and it takes them way too much time to load and offload their containers and the freight they're moving. And a lot of this is perishable stuff coming from Eastern Washington and certain times of the year, and they don't want to be sitting in traffic. So, and we don't want those refrigerator units running constantly while they're sitting on the freeway. So I kind of think everybody sees it as a win-win overall. When you consider the benefits of trying to get a little more reliability.
Thank you.
Are they involved in and I suspect the transit associations or your, organizations that are representing certain parts of your population, like the freight trucking industry, are they part of that 3-year out
Oh, yes.
infusing and helping the development side, I
Oh, yes.
suspect?
Yeah.
Okay.
They are at the table
Okay.
of part of those technical committees and those executive
Okay.
committees. They are there, definitely.
So you may not be hearing from them onesie twosie, just calls to the call center, but they had a seat to help develop that
They are,
in the
yeah,
front end.
including
Okay,
in their
great.
lobby as well.
Wonderful. Okay. And then, yes, please. Sorry.
I had a question on one of the slides. It had talked about where you were actually comparing the historical tolls to modern day dollars and how much more expensive they were then. But then in the slides it had a bunch of dates, so it was like over a span. Does that mean that they had sunsetted?
Yes.
And if that was the case, why would you say it's, or would you not say it's more beneficial to look at something from that perspective in this day and age, even if it is more expensive? Because I think the big fear becomes, well, when are you going to stop taxing me or charging me? It's
Right.
just going to be forever,
Exactly.
you know? And so I'm just curious if you had any run-ins or challenges with that conversation and if you've even entertained it at all.
Yes, so that was a historic practice, and I think it continues to be a challenge, certainly. Right now, our statutes for the more recent toll facilities that have been authorized are silent on end dates, except for Tacoma Narrows. They put an end date of 2031. So that was done in the historical manner. Law says 2030, they will stop when the debt's paid. Now, that could be modified, but for now, that's the plan there. The rest of the facilities, they've stayed silent. So that's the route the legislature has taken, which basically means, tolls would, unless they're prohibited, will continue. Once the financing or the debt's paid off, then you reassess the toll structure, certainly, because you now removed a big cost driver in some of the cases, not necessarily for the express tollings, but for 520 and the tunnel. You've got a base debt you've got to pay off. So once that comes off the table, there's an opportunity. Maybe the toll rates can go down. Volumes are higher. You've got lower costs now. Hopefully, I mean we're optimistic, but that's a long way off. So we don't talk about that too often. But I think that's the intention. Is we would advocate that they stay on in some form, at least to cover your base maintenance and operational costs.
There you go.
That's the key.
Yeah.
And then, in terms of your guys' revenue allocations, or I guess, can you just do a big overview of how it is? It's in terms of incoming revenue, how it's received in terms of gas tax, the tolling, the sales tax, general fund, how it all kind of.
Our general budget structure, or
Yes, just for the department.
well,
What percentage does the tolling play within that?
out of the total department's budget.
I don't know the answer to that. I could get you the answer to that question. I guess
Yeah.
one thing to keep in mind is the tolling component for each of these projects we're talking about are all a little different. They're for the express tolling project, it's a management of traffic focused, so there is no bond repayment associated with that. But for Tacoma Narrows Bridge has a revenue target, 131. Anyway, there's a revenue target for that. There's over $1 billion of toll revenue to be raised on 520, and then for the tunnel, it's 200 million. So it's very variable on what the legislature decides tolls must contribute. So, and tolls for all the tolls that we're talking about stay on the corridor from which they're derived. So they're for those projects, they're for that debt, they're for those projects. Tolls don't go to different parts of the department, other than to maintain and operate those toll facilities and to maintain and operate the tolling system.
Go ahead.
And then, so does that mean that your other revenue streams are able to be more focused on more rural areas around the state, since most of the tolling are in more urbanized areas?
Well, the revenue the tolling revenue that's focused on those more urban areas, that does free up other money for preservation or for other maintenance or for other improvement money that might go to other parts of the state. So the legislature has identified there's a finite amount of money that gas taxes can be used for, and then that pie is full, or that bucket is all spoken for. So then they start looking for other sources of revenue, of which tolling is a part for some of these larger projects.
That's it. Thanks.
I know, it's a lot. So then one last just random question. I noted your patrol piece on one of the slides, and I think, Ed, it was on yours. Do you contribute into the state police with some of the revenue that you generate?
We do pay the state patrol for enforcement of the express toll lanes.
Okay.
There's specific contracts we have with them that is funded by toll revenue. That's
Okay.
correct.
And they're exempt.
That's true, yes.
We don't toll them when they're out there.
No, but that'd be great.
Now,
There was a time we probably would have, but
Yes. There's the one caveat, yes. Well, any last questions, please, Commissioner?
Not really a question, just a comment. Thank you very much. This has been something, I'm new to the commission. I'm trying to get my head wrapped around tolling, living in Southern Oregon. But what I think might be really important is if we could take this segment of our recording and put it into a place where people like legislators and people who are interested in tolling could just click on it so they don't have to watch our entire commission meeting. But I think that this would help kind of calm some of the fears that people are having about tolling. So thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I really like please, Commissioner. Yep.
A question as well. So this is not coming, all of this information is not coming through quite as well as it probably is in the room. So I may have missed this, but are there constitutional or statutory restrictions on tolling funds in Washington?
Heads are nodding yes.
In terms of how they can be expended?
I think it was the same.
They're trying to get the microphone on. There we
he's
are.
got a much stronger phone than I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
I've seen that act before, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there are, in my slides, we cite the RCWs, but yes, the law requires how dollars can be spent, on what they can be spent, they're appropriated, and then by each facility, there's additional law specific to that facility.
And that's all statutory?
Correct.
No constitutional?
No
provisions?
constitutional, no.
Okay. Do you have constitutional provisions on your gas tax
Yes,
expenditures?
18th
Okay.
Amendment restricts it to highway purposes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being a resource to our team. Thank you for going forward and finding all of the areas in which we should not step in the future. I do look forward to the study in terms of looking at some discounts and what that might unveil. And
Yeah, we'll keep you posted.
really appreciative of the partnership and for your commitment of time and being with us today. So more to come. Thank you all. And we'll look forward to, please, go right ahead.
we look forward to seeing you in September.
Yes, thank you. Good to see you. Okay, so we are behind. I'm aware of this. I'd like to welcome Tom McClellan and Ben Kahn to join us. We'll have an update on how we're doing on one of our large investments in modernization of the DMV unit, how the Oliver rollout is going, and how everything is within. Thank you again for the tour and for hosting us. It was wonderful to be over and meet the team and see all the activity going on.
Great, thank you.
Yes, so thank you for offering us a bit of grace. And
I knew we were in trouble as soon as I saw tolling in front of us.
So we'll go ahead and turn the floor over to you.
We'll do what we can.
Yes, exactly.
So for the record, Chair Boehne, my name is Tom McClellan, DMV Administrator. With me is Ben Kahn, our DMV Transformation Manager. We're going to tag team this for you.
Okay.
If we can get some slides up there. Okay. While we're waiting for that, I'll just give you a quick kind of a synopsis, a little history of where we've come, where we are, and a bit of where we're going. So in February of 2012, 7 years ago, we first got $500,000 to start planning for a major replacement of mainframe computer systems. It goes back that far. In the summer of 2013, we hired a consultant who had done some similar studies. Their conclusion was you need to replace these systems. Don't try to just modernize them. Replace them, start over, start from scratch. It's going to take you 9 to 10 years and probably $90 million to do that. And get started soon. That's basically what they were saying. 2015, July of 2015, we started the program. Legislature approved funding for us in some positions, and we got going at that point. About 2 years later, at the end of June of 2017, we signed a contract with Fast Enterprises to procure a commercial off-the-shelf system, or a COTS type system, that had successfully been deployed in other state motor vehicle agencies across the country. In June of 2017, that contract was signed. 18 months later, January 22nd of this year, we rolled out our vehicle system with point-of-sale capabilities and financial accounting capabilities. Not a lot of fanfare went along with that. We're just very pleased that it went through as smoothly as it did, and we've been using that system for almost 2 months now.
Sometimes no news is good news.
Yes.
Especially if it's a project of this
That's right.
scope and scale.
It is a major accomplishment for us, and we're very proud of the accomplishment, but we're halfway there. We still have a driver's side to accomplish. And that is slated for July 6th of 2020, about 16 months from now. And we have already started the project team. At the end of March 4th, I think, was our official kickoff for this next phase. That's underway and going. So July 6th is the rollout. That's also when we'll be able to offer Real ID compliant driver licenses and ID cards combined with that rollout. And from there, there's several things we'd like to do, but it's not fully framed up, and it'll be part of our budget request coming forward, whether that gets funded or not. We would really like to pursue some other things beyond what we have already under contract working on. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Ben. He's going to walk you through a few things.
So the vehicles component of Oliver went live on January 22nd, 2019. When you guys came in and did the tour, you saw the countdown clock and it went to 0, but now it started again for the next rollout. So we're at like 500 days or something to the next one. But we're very excited that it went live and that there was no news in the papers about it. And that's our goal, is to stay out of the newspaper as much as possible. This next shot is our old screens that we used to use, and then we have a shot of our new screens. Our new system is a modern-day system, so it has such functionality as auto-correcting, pull-down menus. We can put notes in there, especially between the field office and headquarters. We have point-of-sale cashiering. We have links to external data sets. We have business rules, built-in edits. We have fees. Our old system had no fees in it, so the customer service representative had to figure it out themselves, kind of memorize all the fees, and sometimes we got them wrong, and sometimes you would get a letter from us, a nice letter, saying that we need a little more money from you. But now we have the fees built in, so we can charge the right amount at the counter. We also are using database technology now instead of flat file technology, and the new system is very intuitive. The millennials that we're hiring are able to pick it up very quickly. On January 22nd, we were able to retire 700,000 lines of COBOL code, which we're very proud of doing. So we had
happy faces.
So when we went live, we had 74 desk side support staff that were deployed across the state during the first 2 weeks of using Oliver. And these support staff helped answer questions and walked employees through the common transactions. The desk side support staff included our vendor as well as our subject matter experts, helping our staff get used to using the new system. We also spent a lot of time on organizational change management. We have staff who have been with us for 30 years and are used to using those green screens and those COBOL systems. And so we spent a lot of time helping our staff deal with the changes that were coming so they were prepared for the new system. We had 90 change agents across our 60 field offices and at headquarters, and we had 3 readiness assessments that we did so we could see where the people were, where our staff were before, a year before we went live, and then right before we went live to make sure that we had the right supports in place so that they could be successful with the new system. So this is our online DMV2U webpage. You can do the following things on this webpage. You can purchase a trip permit. You can order custom plates. You can also check custom plate availability. You can replace a plate or print a renewal receipt. You can do notices like vehicle sale or a dealer dismantler complaint. You can report an address change, and you can continue to renew your vehicle registration. We also have the opportunity for you to start or initiate your title registration transaction online and then come into a field office to finish it. So we also have some excellent options for our customers. Our business partners have a portal that they can log into and have a dashboard tailored for their business needs. And we have separate dashboards for different kinds of businesses. For example, dealers and record inquiry account holders can pull up different information to help them do their business online in a secure platform. Just some numbers for you. Since we went live, we have processed over $8 million of services through our online system. We've done almost 60,000 vehicle renewal registrations, over 3,000 title pre-applications, and over 10,000 notice of vehicle sales. So our new online system is working, and we would like more folks to use it so that our wait times in our field offices can go down as well.
That brings about a question. What type of outreach, many who have lived in Oregon for years know the limitations of our old system and may not be fully aware of the new services. So are we doing outreach and really, okay, am I teeing you up for a...
Yeah, my next slide. So yeah, perfect. Public outreach. Thank you.
There you go. Sorry.
I'm glad we practiced before this. Yeah, that was great. Okay. I'm doing my part, so we have transparent and timely communication, and we've been providing different avenues for the public to stay up to date on our transformation program. Last May, we held an online open house where folks could participate from across the state. We had over 600 participants representing all the counties in Oregon, and we got really good feedback on what they want to see in the DMV of the future and how they want us to provide those services. So we took a lot of that and baked it into our approach as well as what we want to see in the future of DMV. We also have an online toolkit to help inform our customers and business partners about the services available to them. In addition to our website and news releases, we also have a quarterly newsletter that's in all our DMV field offices that has good information about what services they can do online. And if they do show up in our field offices, we now have this little card that we give them that lets them know what they can do, why they wait for their number to be called. There's things they can do to process the transaction sooner, like beginning to fill out the application online on their smartphone, so when they get to the counter, we're ready for them and we can finish that transaction. So we're really trying to get the word out. We also put together some information for the legislators and cities and counties to share with their constituents about DMV2U so that we can get more people using that, definitely. But if you have ideas of ways we can get the word out even more, we'd be honored or would like to hear those, definitely. Right, we also, put a toolkit together for the legislators that they can use to inform their constituents about the services we offered. I get an opportunity to go to field offices on a regular basis. I was in North Salem DMV yesterday, been down to Coos Bay, been over to Lebanon, and I hear a lot of good things from the customers. Customers are happy they don't have to fill out forms anymore. They can go straight to the counter. We can pull up their insurance information so they don't have to run back out to their car and get their insurance card. And just yesterday, a new employee at North Salem DMV told me that the new system was easy to learn and easy to use. Again, a millennial, but still, it was good that they felt that it was a system that they could handle. So I'll turn the time back over to Tom to talk about the budget.
Okay. So just as a reminder, it is a, can you hit that button there? There we go. It is a $90 million commitment plan for us. We spent about $12 million in the first biennium, that 2015-17 period. We anticipate that will be up to about $48 million by the end of the current biennium. Our budget request to the governor's recommended budget for next biennium has about $30 million included in that for us to continue moving forward with that driver's system replacement and stabilizing things later in the biennium as well as we go forward. We also, besides the tour we did for you guys, we also did a tour in February of the Joint Committee on Transportation. So I think one of you may have even suggested you need to get some legislators here to see this. We followed through, and 2/3 of them, I think, and a couple of staff people from the committee were able to join us. Director joined us, walked through the building, saw many of the same things that you guys were able to see. So it was very good, kind of helping to build that awareness and of the need. hopefully support moving forward. Just to show you a screen, a dashboard basically that we get from our third-party quality assurance vendor. And this was in the fourth quarter of 2018, just before we're ready to go live. You can see there's a lot of green listed up there, which is great to see. I'm not sure we ever had anything red in the time, maybe once.
Yeah, early on.
Maybe early on there were some things. But there's a lot of different factors that they're evaluating. They're doing interviews, they're reviewing deliverables from the project and looking for things that they can identify that we could do better. And so it's been very helpful for us, and that will continue obviously as we roll into the driver's piece of this. Also wanted to touch on that our vendor is FAST Enterprises. It's a $69.4 million contract that we've signed. $40 million of that is for the consulting services to configure the system and get it installed and used by us. And they're halfway there right now with that part of it. There's also, though, about $29 million reserved in that contract for years 7 through 10, once they've completed the second rollout, so in July of 2020, to start paying for maintenance and support for this system. One of the things that in building a system yourself, you rarely think about the cost to maintain and support something. Once it's been built, there's a tendency to just kind of let it go, fix it if something breaks, but you don't keep it current with updates, software version updates. And in this case, we have a contract that has a base level for maintenance and support that we can tailor based on the ability of our our information systems staff to step in and take over at some point. We're going to start off with the highest level of support from our vendor, but the idea is we're going to send people to training, we're going to spend more time with the system, so that over time we think our staff will be able to take on more of that and cut back on the amount of maintenance that we're paying for from the vendor. The good thing also that because so many other states, DMVs across the country are starting to use this, as they get enhancements created for their business, that becomes available to us as well. And we can turn those features on or modules on as we like. So it's another piece that we're continuing to improve the system and use it over time. So it's a cost of doing business. We are not counting that as part of the $90 million project cost. And I kind of relate it to a bridge project. When you see a bridge construction project, it doesn't talk about the maintenance and support 10 years off into the future. It's really to build it and have it ready to go and use it. That's why we're not considering it really as part of that $90 million investment to create the new system and put it in place. But there will be an ongoing cost. I want to make sure that's very clear to you guys as well.
So the ongoing cost is $29 million?
No, it's about maintenance and support in the first year is about $3.7 million.
Okay.
That's per year. So
okay.
It's going to continue out through the life of that contract. And the contract can actually be extended as well.
Okay.
If we're still happy with the service we have.
So we may want to, as we go through the budget in the upcoming years and kind of get to that crossroads, I suspect that the commission will, there'll be a touch point there. And great.
Chair Beatty, we do have a budget package requesting the funding for the first payment in the next biennium. Okay. And we'll have to come back again, I anticipate, in a couple of years for the larger amount for 2 years worth in the 21-23 time period. Okay. So we're going to be back talking to you about that and what level of support we want to be able to provide.
And then also, are there efficiencies that we're starting to see and all that? I suspect that there will be a conversation about as we have a lot more online activity, what that means in the office and what the needs are going forward in terms of staffing. And I suspect that there is, you have to staff up in order to bring on, but at some point there will be a shift. And so I look forward in the future of when we have that conversation too.
Chair Beatty, it's a great observation. It's going to take a while for things to stabilize for us. There's more work right now in the field than there used to be, but maybe there'll be less in the headquarters at times. So we're going to have to figure out the net effect over some time and let things kind of stabilize, I guess. But we're hopeful.
Great.
There actually will be some offsetting costs there, savings. First rollout was in January, as you see there. Second system rollout, July of 2020. And then we've got other aspirations, more online services. We've put things in there. We've considered a queuing system, like a lobby management kind of a queuing system. Kiosks are used a lot, self-service kiosks in other states. If you've lived in other states, you've probably seen those. There's a lot of possibilities, and those are going to take budget requests as well to move ahead. But those are the things we're starting to think about beyond the driver's new system in July of 2020. You've seen, I think, this slide before, perhaps, debit and credit cards in our field offices, getting our data ready, using digital imaging instead of microfilm, systems, getting all of our offices up to just a basic, fundamental of baseline, basically, bandwidth to be able to handle transactions over online. The VIN decoder is up there. That's a House Bill 2017 requirement that takes effect in January of next year, where we start to assess a registration fee based on the MPG rating of the vehicle. We needed software to be able to calculate that, to tell us what the MPG rating is for those vehicles. So that'll be coming fairly soon. And then a brand new card design we're rolling out statewide. We've got about half of our offices now have the new equipment, new cameras, and are issuing the card that looks like the one on the screen versus the one we've had for many years before. In the upper right-hand corner, I think I've told you this before, but there's a silhouette of Oregon. That's where the black star for a Real ID compliant card will be identified, in very small print, not for Real ID if the card does not meet Real ID standards. Again, July 6th of 2020 is when that starts to take effect. Okay. We'll continue as we move ahead. Customer service focus. It's ultimately what we're about here with the changes we're making. The driver system, we're going to have just a laser focus on accomplishing what we've set out to accomplish. And I think we were successful with the first rollout because we said no to a lot of things. There was a lot of functionality that we could have added along the way that just would have potentially created more risk for us. So as a management team and as a steering team for the project, we've really been very tight on, we're replacing, first of all, we're replacing what we have, and we're going to take advantage of some things with the technology, but we're going to be successful. We're going to be on budget, on schedule, and if anything's going to give, it'll be the scope of the project. But we're going to get the essentials in place, and then once we have the technology, we can start to improve it and enhance it over time. And we'll soon be doing that with the vehicle system now that we've got that installed. So I don't know if you have any questions specifically about Real ID. I know is a topic. We'll probably be back at some point to tell you more about what we're planning there. But we'll open it up for any questions you have.
Often these projects don't go quite as smoothly, so I'm going to knock on wood and just say congratulations, gentlemen, and to the team. I think you've got a lot of checks and balances in place that really help to make sure that we're on track. So great job.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Vice Chair Van Brocklin, are you still with us there?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to you, and we will have a discussion about the recruitment process.
So I think we can save some time here. There are two fairly specific actions that we're proposing that the Commission approve today. The first is a revised timeline, which would add several weeks to the initial schedule, which I think we've come to recognize was overly ambitious in order to allow for a robust and inclusive search process. And so that is before the Commission, and I strongly recommend approval of that. The second piece is to authorize the search committee to develop a position description that can, in concert with our search consultant, which can then be posted for public comment and brought back to the Commission for final approval in May. So those are the two specific things for us today, and hopefully we can move these pieces forward. Certainly open for questions on these or any other matters related to the search.
One point just to draw out of that discussion would be that we intend the position description to be vetted through a variety of stakeholders, and that public engagement will have some specific touch points as well. And so it won't necessarily, okay. So just making sure that for individuals that are concerned.
We're going to have loads and loads of public involvement and stakeholder involvement all the way through the process.
Excellent. So I'm looking at commission members. Do we have questions for Vice Chair Van Brocklin?
I trust his leadership on it.
Okay, so we have the 2 requests of the revised timeline and then allowing for the development of a draft job description that can be brought back and then would be used as the public template for folks to assist us with revisions.
Would you like me to read?
I would love a motion to that effect. It'd be great.
Move for approval of the recruitment and hiring process, hiring plan for the Oregon Department of Transportation Director, and authorize the search committee in consultation with search committee selected executive recruitment firm to develop a job description for the ODOT director position and post said job description for public comment. The commission will then review and approve the final job description at its May Oregon Transportation Commission meeting.
How precise. It's almost as though that were written out.
It's just my
off the
snappy
top.
memory.
Just always set to amaze.
Very eloquent. Very eloquent.
Okay, with that, do we have any further discussion or questions? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great job. So we will move on now to item K. Mr. Havik, I will welcome you. And for those that are panicking, we do believe that this topic will not require the 45 minutes that we had allocated, which is great because we needed that extra time to visit with our folks, our friends from Washington. So.
And even better news, it's not 3 hours like it was last month. So.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Boehne. For the record, Eric Kovig, Planning Section Manager for ODOT. And I'm here just to give you an update of where we moved from the February meeting and where we currently stand and kind of that process for moving forward. So in February, we received a lot of information. The Transportation Commission heard a lot of information from our project sponsors, the TAGA Group, Final Review Committee. We had recommendations from Director Garrett and Director Harder with Business Oregon. And at the conclusion of that meeting, we kind of talked about what are the next steps. And the direction we took away from that, really, Chair Boehne, was your request to look into kind of a matrixed approach for how do we figure out what are those critical next questions that we need answered. What did we kind of hear from the dialogue that you had with the various sponsors and with TAGA Group? And then how do we move forward into a decision-making framework to eventually get to a final decision? So as staff, we really started working on, after that February meeting, what are those key questions, knowing that we need to get that information to our project sponsors so they can go out and start to collect that information to bring it back. So based upon what we heard from the conversations between the project sponsors and you last month, and some follow-on phone calls that Cooper Brown and myself held with each of you, we collected what we believe is a good set of questions that are really more of those critical pieces we need to get answered to help inform your decision, yes or no, or to move forward with specific project proposals. Based upon that, we developed a, not necessarily a matrix, but a spreadsheet listing out those questions. And those questions really are focused in on a couple of key areas. So there's 2 parts to the spreadsheet. The first part is key questions that went to all of the project sponsors. And when we think about, it doesn't matter which project sponsor you are, you're going to have issues with making sure you have an operator for this facility. So we wanted to start to lock down where are we at with those operator agreements, what's outstanding, and what's going to be the process to get all those operator agreements in total effect and operational, and what kind of fee and rate structures might be applied from an operator level. The second one was around rail cars, recognizing that these facilities really can't function without some sort of commitment to rail cars and rail car availability. We wanted to lock down some of those outstanding issues, and that's one we heard very clearly, I believe, from you in the phone calls as well as in the meeting. The next area that we wanted to kind of hit was really around that rail commitment. We had our good folks from the Union Pacific Railroad come to the February meeting. They outlined what their business processes would be and where they were at in those business processes. But we also heard very clearly from our folks in the Brooks project proposal that their plan really relies on being able to get Portland and Western into the UP yard, BNSF yard, and how that operational agreements will work between those Class 1 railroads. So getting to that next level or next tier of approval and understanding from our Class 1 railroads is something we really heard, and that was part of those questions. The remainder are really kind of focused specifically in on what needs to happen to each individual project. So as you can see on page 2 of that spreadsheet, we really divided out those questions individually to each project sponsor and what they need to focus around. And most of that is gaining more understanding about their business process or how they're going to solve some of their issues and some of the timelines, how we're going to get to those final decisions and recommendations. Understanding we know we're not going to get final rate structures from railroads and operators till much further along in the process, but what's going to be the timeline to get there? And that's really what those questions were helping focus in on. We have met with the project sponsors. We met with them last Thursday on the 14th to deliver these set of questions. We made sure we walked through them line by line with our project sponsors. They know exactly what we're asking for. And as you can see in many of those questions, we're trying to be very specific. Do we need something from the railroad, the operator of the facility, or is it from the project sponsor? Because we want to make sure we're getting the right level of information and concurrence of that information to help inform your decision. They took that information and they had until yesterday to contact us about how long it would take to complete that complete all those requests. And I'm happy to say we do have a timeline now set with our project sponsors about how this will move forward. So there's actually a double set of timelines that we negotiated with all the project sponsors. And primarily all the material exclusive of those Class 1 railroad letters that we're asking for, that material and those questions are due from the project sponsors to ODOT by April 23rd. Because of the timeline and trying to work with some of the Class 1 railroads, all the project sponsors felt they needed a little bit more time, so we set a timeline for May 3rd to really give them a little more time to help answer that question and to work with those Class 1 railroads. So what we'll do with that information, as soon as we get the first set of questions and responses back, ODOT staff will be looking to go through that. We've already got our third-party consultant lined up to help us review that information and help inform the discussion. So the Tioga Group is ready to receive that. And we'll go through those first set of responses, and then we'll go look at the letters from the Class 1 railroads and bring that information forward. It really looks like we will be ready to bring this information to you for your May OTC meeting on May 16th. So that really brings us now to all the information, those key critical questions that were in that spreadsheet moving forward. We now need to start to work on more of that matrix around the decision framework and how are we going to, as a commission, take all that information, dissect it, and come forward with a final decision out of this process, because we do need to get to that final decision. And so right now we've really just started a theoretical conversation with you about what kind of factors and issues and considerations make sense. Our next step is for Cooper and myself to meet with you, give you some phone calls individually, start to wrap up what are those areas of concern, considerations that you really think merit going into that document. And then we'll bring back to you in April kind of a framework that you can take action on. It's really important for us to get that in a final written version so our project sponsors, our stakeholder groups, the public, media, and others that are really watching this decision process understand what are going to be the considerations you all need to make in making that final decision. So we'll be looking to bring that back to you in April. And then assuming we get to a final decision point in May, if that's when things occur, again, there's a lot of interest to try to get these moving forward because the timeline of entering into an IGA will take a little bit of time. Project sponsors will need to start making plans for the next phase of the work that they need to do. And that IGA process will be very, very critical. I think really Director Garrett and Director Harder really hit this well in their response letters back in February, taking that incremental approach to understand what are going to be the milestones And the term I'm using now is really a stage gate process, that there's going to be specific stages that we need to work with the project sponsors. We get through a stage before we start going into the next one. Let's make sure that the investment is continuing to make sense as we move forward versus authorizing expenditure of $25 or $26 million and getting to the end and maybe not having those agreements in place. So we'll have to work that very carefully with our project sponsors. We've been already meeting with Department of Justice to try to figure out what those stage gates might look like. And quite honestly, a couple of the questions that we have for the project sponsors right now will help feed into that information as well. So that is my condensed version because I know we're running a little bit late. Let me just stop there and see if there's any questions.
Feel is a good process?
I think we're going.
Thank you.
I think we're going in the right direction. This is a significant expenditure of public funds, and I want to make sure we do it right.
I concur.
So to the team, thank you very much. I think what while some may feel that this has been a long process, for us now having information and making sure that we have all of the information that we need to make a good decision. I think I've said in the past we could make a decision today, but it probably isn't the decision that people would want us to make because we don't have the information to make one that we would feel comfortable with. Right. So I appreciate the sponsors taking the extra time and effort to help us get to those decisions and informing us about the maybe gaps within the information that we have today. Mm-hmm. And I like this process a lot. So thank you for working with us to get to where we are today.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right, Director Garrett, we have the consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And with no concerns or conflicts identified, I would ask the Commission to approve the consent calendar en bloc.
Okay. I would welcome a motion.
So moved.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. There he is. I knew it was coming. Okay. Motion carries. So with that, Director Garrett, anything else for the good of the order?
Madam Chair, we've completed our business for the day.
Okay, wonderful. Then we are adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vice Chair Van Brocklin. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Don't kick anybody.